scary stories.
The bus rolled up a winding road, wheels grinding against gravel as the dense forest pressed closer on both sides. The pines of Dagger Lake stood tall and unmoving, shadows stretching long across the path like black fingers reaching from the earth itself. The students inside the bus were a mix of yawns, side-eyes, and muttered insults. The kind of tension that only came from being forced to spend a weekend with people you barely tolerated. Ms. Tilda Blackstone stood at the front, arms crossed, eyes narrowed behind thin-rimmed glasses. Her presence was as icy as the mountain air that seeped through the rusted vents. She tapped her clipboard. "Listen up. This isn't summer camp. It's punishment. You're here because you failed. Act like animals, and you'll be treated like animals. But follow the rules, complete the program, and you might just save your sorry GPAs." No one clapped. No one spoke. The only response was a dramatic yawn from Bryce Holloway in the back row, earning him a sharp glare. The driver stopped at a rusty metal gate. Beyond it, the road curved toward the lake. A wooden sign, weathered and barely legible, read, "Camp Dagger Lake, founded 1968. Someone had scratched out the 1968 and written "Never Left" in red paint beneath it. Officer Warren Briggs, a broad-shouldered man in a faded security uniform, stepped off the porch of the main cabin and unlocked the gate. He didn't smile. He didn't speak, just nodded once and waved the bus through. Something in the air shifted as the gate closed behind them. They were led to the clearing where 7 small cabins sat around a dried-up fire pit. There was a broken flagpole, a crooked totem carved into a deer skull, and a row of rusting canoes near the water's edge. Camp Dagger Lake, by all appearances, was dead. But it had the smell of something that once tried to live. Each student was assigned a bunkmate and a cabin, with Ms. Blackstone, reading the names as if they were a prison roll call. Samantha Graves, Lena Marsh, Zane Cutler, Bryce Holloway, Amber Reed, Mason Voss, and Tommy Blair. 7 teenagers, 10 beds, no Wi-Fi. "Phones in the lockbox," Blackstone barked. "You'll get them back when you leave, if you leave." The way she said it was meant to be sarcastic, but it settled uneasily in the air. Inside the cabins, time had rotted everything but the mold. The mattresses sagged, the wallpaper peeled. There were scratch marks on the inside of the closet doors. Mason Voss noticed them first, but said nothing. He simply ran his finger over the deepest gouge, blinked once, and looked away. That night, they gathered in the mess hall for orientation. Officer Briggs stood in the corner, arms folded, face unreadable. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows against the old lodge walls. Taxidermy animals stared blankly from mounted plaques. Above them, "Rules are simple," Blackstone began. "No one leaves camp boundaries. No wandering at night. Curfew is 10 p.m. sharp. Don't test me on that. And whatever you think you heard about this place, forget it." But of course, they didn't forget. Not when Lena Marsh leaned in close to Bryce and whispered, "My cousin said this place was shut down after kids disappeared here." Bryce snorted. "Your cousin probably also believes in Bigfoot." Lena didn't laugh. Outside, the moon rose over the lake. Fog curled at the edges of the trees. The canoes creaked slightly, though no one touched them. Somewhere in the dark, an animal gave a low, guttural moan. Not a wolf, not a bear, something else. Amber was the first to complain about the cold. She wrapped her silver jacket tight and muttered about basic safety violations. That's when Mason spoke, quiet, unsure. "There's someone in the woods." Everyone looked up. He pointed toward the tree line behind cabin 4. "I saw them watching, just standing there. No flashlight, just still." Officer Briggs was already walking over. He swept the beam of his flashlight through the trees. Nothing. No movement, just mist rising from the ground. "You saw a tree," Briggs muttered. "Plenty of those here," but Mason knew what he saw. And Bryce, who never took much seriously, decided to test the boundaries. "I'll go check it out," he said, grabbing a stick like a sword. "If I die, tell my mom I owed her $20. He jogged off into the trees. 5 minutes passed, then 10. When he came back, his face was pale. "Okay," he said, dropping the joke. There was someone out there. Later that night, as the camp settled into restless silence, Samantha Graves sat by her cabin window, watching the fog thicken. A strange light flickered in the woods, soft and red, pulsing like a heartbeat. It vanished the moment she blinked, and then she saw him, a man, standing completely still between the trees, wearing what looked like a dark mask. No movement, no threat, just watching. By the time she woke her bunkmate to show her, he was gone. Morning brought little relief. The air felt colder, heavier. The group gathered for their first nature hike, but Mason refused to go. "Someone was in our cabin," he claimed. "The closet door was open this morning. It was locked last night." Blackstone dismissed him. But as they walked deeper into the woods, past hollowed trees and decaying signs, they passed a small stone marker half buried in moss. It read, "Campers. Lost. 3rd July 12th, 1999, returned." Amber snapped a photo. "Creepy as hell," she said, forcing a laugh. But even Officer Briggs looked away. That night, the power flickered during dinner. The lights buzzed, and the fire went out. Everyone went quiet. Then, outside, a soft scratching sound. Like nails, against a window pane. They rushed to look, but saw only fog. The scratching stopped. In its place, a single handprint remained on the glass. Too high to be from a teenager, too sharp to be human, and far too fresh to be old. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees like prison bars, thin, cold, and distant. Camp Dagger Lake didn't feel any warmer in daylight. The fog had lifted, but the air remained heavy, the kind that lingered in the lungs a beat too long. Breakfast was served in silence. Powdered eggs, watery oatmeal, and the constant creak of the mess hall roof as the wind passed over it. No one mentioned the handprint from the night before. No one had to. Even Ms. Blackstone seemed on edge, glancing more often at the windows than at the students. Bryce was quieter than usual, eyes darting toward the woods every few seconds. When asked what he saw the night before, he shrugged it off. "Nothing. Just don't go out there alone." But someone always had to test the rules. Lena Marsh was the quietest of the group, smart, observant, and the only one who had brought a notebook. She was scribbling in it that morning, filling a page with strange symbols and question marks. When Sam asked what she was doing, Lena answered without looking up. "My cousin told me this camp was closed after 3 kids vanished. No one was ever charged. They say the cops blamed it on an animal attack, but the bodies were never found." She turned the notebook around, a rough sketch of a deer skull, surrounded by circles and slashes, the exact pattern carved into the totem near the lake. "It's a binding sigil," Lena whispered. "Witches use them to trap spirits, or summon them." Sam laughed, but uneasily. "You believe in that stuff?" Lena didn't smile. "I believe in what doesn't make sense." Later that afternoon, the group was assigned firewood duty. Tommy, Blair, the youngest, was paired with Mason and sent toward the tree line with a plastic bucket and a warning to stay where we can see you. They were gone less than 20 minutes, but when Mason returned, he was alone. "I lost him," he said flatly. "What do you mean you lost him?" Blackstone snapped. Mason looked around. "He was right behind me, then he wasn't. They searched for over 2 hours, calling Tommy's name, checking the trails, peeking into abandoned cabins. Nothing. Not a sound. No footprints. No answer. Briggs eventually waved them back. It's a trick. The kid's hiding. Probably wants to scare us. We'll find him by nightfall. But he didn't sound convinced. That evening, the sky turned purple too early, and the wind carried a foul, metallic scent like rusted nails and wet dirt. Dinner was tense, the food untouched, and Tommy's seat remained empty. Amber Reed finally snapped. "This isn't funny anymore," she hissed at Miss Blackstone. "Where is he? We should be calling the police." "There's no signal," Blackstone replied, "and Briggs is handling it." But Officer Briggs was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the group sat in uneasy silence until Bryce took out his phone. "I got my phone back from the lockbox while everyone was freaking out," he whispered. "I'm gonna take a video of the lake. Maybe if we document this, people will believe us," Amber scoffed. "You're doing this for followers," he laughed. "A little." He left the cabin around 7:30 p.m. The sun had vanished behind the tree line, casting long black shadows across the lake. He never came back. When Bryce hadn't returned by 9 p.m., Sam and Lena went searching. What they found was a phone, dropped, in the dirt near the canoe rack. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. They opened the camera roll. There were 6 photos and 2 videos. The photos were typical Bryce shots. Goofy faces, an exaggerated selfie with the lake, a snapshot of the totem. Then came the 6th photo, a blurry figure standing in the background, barely visible behind a tree. Dressed in dark, tattered clothes, wearing a mask. The mask looked like bone, elongated with dark pits where the eyes should be. The first video began with Bryce talking into the camera. "I'm at the dock. It's creepy as hell. Can't see crap out here. Wait, what the..." He turned the camera. The frame jerked. Something was moving between the trees. Quick, fast, animal-like. The video cut to static. The second video was just blackness, but in the background, someone was breathing. Then a voice, raspy, low, barely human, whispered, "Leave the offering," and the video ended. By midnight, panic had set in. Briggs had still not returned. Miss Blackstone tried to act in control, but the students saw through her. She was sweating, glancing at the doors, locking windows. Sam demanded answers. "You knew something was wrong with this place, didn't you?" Blackstone didn't respond. Instead, she told them to stay in the mess hall for the night. Doors locked, lights off after 10. "Safety in numbers," she said. "Briggs will find the boy." But the power cut out again at 9:47 p.m. This time, it didn't come back. Candles were lit. Whispers began. Amber thought she saw someone standing on the mess hall porch. But when they opened the door, no one was there. A wooden totem had been left on the steps, freshly carved, wet with something dark. Lena examined it under the candlelight. "This is a death charm," she said. "Whoever left it is warning us." Then, from the far end of the camp, a scream. Short, cut off too quickly to be natural. Mason stood up, grabbed the fire poker, and locked the mess hall door himself. "We're being hunted," he muttered. No. One disagreed. As the night dragged on, the group sat close, staring at the windows. Shadows danced on the walls. One of them moved, but no one was near the candle. Then they heard it. The closet door in the back creaked open, slow, deliberate. Inside, there was nothing, except a single shoe. Small, worn. Tommy's, still warm. The candle burned low. The fog outside thickened again, and somewhere near the lake something howled. Not a wolf, not a bear. It sounded like something wearing a person's voice, waiting, hungry, watching. The next morning, the air was colder than the day before. The trees no longer whispered, they watched. Their branches didn't move, but somehow, they loomed. Even the birds had gone silent. Tommy was still gone. So was Bryce. And now, so was Officer Briggs. The mess hall was a tomb of uneaten food and stale breath. Amber Reed refused to speak. Lena Marsh hadn't slept. Mason Voss sat near the window, gripping the fire poker like it was a lifeline. Ms. Blackstone stared at her clipboard, reading names that had no faces anymore. Samantha Graves was the first to say what no one wanted to admit. "They're not coming back," no one argued. By midday, the fog had crept all the way up to the steps of the cabins. The power was still out. There was no signal, no Wi-Fi, no cars, no sign of help. Amber insisted they find the emergency radio tower. There has to be one. These camps are required to have one. Ms. Blackstone hesitated. The old tower is a mile through the woods, and the path hasn't been cleared in years. "We'll clear it ourselves," Mason growled. "We're not sitting here waiting to die." Sam, Mason, Amber, and Lena formed the group. Blackstone stayed behind. The trail to the tower was overgrown with thorns and dead branches. The trees closed in tighter with every step. Birds didn't sing here. Bugs didn't chirp. There was only the sound of their boots crunching old leaves, and the occasional snap of something deeper in the woods. Amber was the first to fall behind. She let out a small cry and pointed to her arm. A long, deep scratch had appeared across her forearm, bleeding freely. "No branch did that," she whispered. "Something's following us." They pushed on. When they reached the tower clearing, it was already too late. The tower had collapsed, burnt. Charred beams stuck out of the ground like broken ribs. The satellite dish lay cracked open like a skull. A fire had torn through it long ago, and no one had ever repaired it. Amber fell to her knees. "We're trapped." "No," Mason said, scanning the tree line. "We're being kept." They hurried back, but the trail didn't look the same anymore. Lena was the first to notice the symbols etched into the bark of the trees. Circles, lines, and spirals. All fresh, carved deep. Sam picked up a torn piece of fabric hanging from a branch, a sleeve, Tommy's. That night, the storm began, not with thunder, but with silence. The wind died, the air stilled, and the cabins felt smaller than ever before. Inside, the group gathered in cabin 2, locking the doors and blocking the windows. Amber sat on her mattress, staring at the scratch on her arm. It had turned black around the edges. "It's spreading," she said. "It burns." Lena checked it with a flashlight. "That's not a scratch, it's a mark." "What kind of mark?" Sam asked. Lena didn't answer. Just before midnight, Zane Cutler announced he was done hiding. "I'm not dying in a wooden box," he said, grabbing a flashlight and a camp axe from the wall. "I'll go to the lake. If there's a boat, I'll take it. If not, then I'll swim." "You won't make it," Mason warned. "Then I'll die trying." He left before anyone could stop him. The rest stayed in silence. Until the scream. It didn't last long. And when they ran outside, all they found was Zane's axe, floating at the edge of the dock. The water around it was dark. Too dark. And a single ripple spread across the lake, but no one had thrown a stone. They returned to the cabin, sealing the door behind them. Fear now ran the camp. There were 5 of them left. Sam, Mason, Amber, Lena, and Ms. Blackstone. Then, Sam remembered something. "Bryce's phone," she said. "It had a second video. Not the one we watched before. Another one. I didn't open it." They scrambled to the mess hall and retrieved it from a hidden cabinet. The video was time-stamped, 11:03 p.m., the night he vanished. It opened with Bryce's terrified face whispering, "I think someone's in the water." I heard them, splashing, but they're not swimming. The video panned across the lake. Nothing. Then, something emerged. A figure, slowly rising out of the water, completely upright, wearing the bone mask, dripping, silent. It didn't run. It didn't flinch. It simply stood on the surface of the water, like it wasn't water at all. Then the video glitched, scrambled, and ended. Lena backed away from the screen. The legends were true. This camp isn't haunted by a ghost. It's cursed by what was left behind. What does that mean? Sam whispered. Lena opened her notebook. A drawing filled the page, the same sigil carved into the trees, into the totems, into the walls. "This is a seal," she said. "Not to keep something out, but to keep something in," and someone had broken it. Later that night they heard footsteps around the cabin, not walking, dragging, like someone was limping through wet mud. Over and over. The power was gone. The candles were low. And in the hallway, the door to the bathroom creaked open. Amber went to check. She didn't scream. She just stopped moving. And then she began laughing. Softly, darkly. The kind of laughter that no longer belonged to a person. She turned, and her eyes were completely black. Blood leaked from her ears, and a voice, not her own, spoke through her lips. "It's awake." She collapsed, convulsing, then went still. Her pulse was gone. There were 4 left, and the seal had been broken. Rain began to fall, soft and cold, washing over the lake. The totems bled sap like open wounds. In the shadows beyond the tree line, figures moved. Not running, not human, but waiting, watching. And now, they knew who to come for next. Rain clawed at the windows like desperate fingers. The forest groaned as the wind shifted, bending tall pines into mournful arcs. Inside cabin 2, the remaining survivors huddled in silence. Amber Reed's body lay still. Her blackened eyes had faded, leaving only hollow sockets that stared at nothing. Lena covered her with a blanket, whispering something under her breath. A prayer, a charm, or maybe a plea. There were 4 left. Samantha Graves, Lena Marsh, Mason, Voss, and Ms. Tilda Blackstone. But even now, that number felt too hopeful. By dawn, the rain had stopped, but the lake steamed. Mason paced the cabin, fire poker still in hand. His grip never loosened. Lena flipped through her notebook, now filled with more symbols than words, and Sam watched Ms. Blackstone, who had yet to say anything about what they had seen. "What was that thing?" Sam asked finally. Blackstone stared at the boarded-up window. It wasn't supposed to wake up. They pushed her for answers, and she gave them what little she could. 20 years ago, 3 campers went missing. That much is true. The camp blamed animals, the police found nothing. But those who lived nearby knew something else. There was a chapel built near the south edge of the forest, long before this land was even purchased for the camp. People said it was cursed ground. She looked at Lena. "Those totems you keep drawing, they were placed to hold it back. Every generation, someone was sent to maintain them." "Who?" Lena asked. Blackstone hesitated. "My father." The truth was bleeding out like a wound now. Tilda Blackstone had grown up in the town nearby. Her father had been a caretaker of the land, a keeper of the old symbols. She knew the stories weren't just myths. Camp Dagger Lake had been built not as a retreat, but as a prison. Not for people, but for something beneath the lake. A spirit, a presence, a thing older than any name. And now that presence was waking. With no other choice, the group made their way to the old chapel. It stood on a moss-covered hill beyond the trail, hidden behind a crumbled stone wall. Its windows were boarded. The roof sagged. Crosses had been snapped in half. On the front door, a deep burned handprint, fresh. Inside it smelled of damp stone and blood. The altar was broken. Candles still burned on their own, and behind a cracked wooden panel they found a hatch leading down. Mason refused to go first. Sam did. The basement was colder than the lake outside. Stone walls, wet with condensation, closed in tight. Old wooden benches rotted in place. And on one wall, someone had painted dozens of names in black ink. Tommy Blair, Bryce Holloway, Zane Cutler, Amber Reed. More names. Dozens. All scratched. Over. Except for Sam, Mason, Lena, Tilda. In the center of the basement sat a book, bound in leather, pages yellowed and brittle. Lena opened it. It was written in a dead dialect. But the illustrations told the story. The lake wasn't natural. It was a mirror, a false surface built to seal something beneath. Every 20 years it whispered to someone weak, someone angry, someone desperate. And each time a ritual was performed. Blood was offered, the seal renewed. Unless it wasn't. Suddenly the hatch above slammed shut. Footsteps, then a voice. Deep, familiar. Why did you come here? It was Officer Briggs, but when they climbed up, they realized it wasn't Briggs anymore. His eyes were sunken, skin stretched too tight. His mouth moved slowly, like it had forgotten how. And when he smiled, his teeth were all wrong. You should have stayed in the cabins, he said. Now you've seen too much. He attacked. Mason swung. The poker, but Briggs didn't react. Not to the first hit. Not to the second. Only when Lena whispered something in the language from the book did he flinch. And then he screamed. A sound not made by a man. The walls trembled. The candles went out. Briggs collapsed. Dead or empty, they fled the chapel. Behind them, the trees moved again, not swaying, but parting, making room for something to pass. The air was heavier now, the fog thicker, and on the shore of the lake, something had been built. A circle of bones, a totem of stitched skin, a mouth carved in the earth. Sam looked to Lena. This isn't over, she whispered. Lena nodded. It's just beginning. That night, back in the cabin, Ms. Blackstone packed a small bag and quietly stepped outside. She thought no one noticed, but Mason followed. He watched as she knelt at the totem beside the lake and began to speak. Not in English. Not in any human tongue. She lit a candle, placed her blood on the stone, and said a name. A name that made Mason's ears bleed just from hearing it. He screamed. She turned, eyes glowing gold. You weren't supposed to see this, she said. But it was too late. The wind died, the lake boiled, and beneath the chapel something opened its eyes. The ground whispered in 100 voices, and they all said the same thing. The offering begins now. The air that night was thick like smoke, even though no fires burned. Yet, every tree bent slightly inward as if leaning to listen. The lake was still, silent, mirror flat. And just beneath the surface, something moved. In cabin 2, the last survivors sat in a circle. Sam, Lena, Mason, and Ms. Tilda Blackstone. None of them trusted the others completely anymore. Not after what Mason saw. She was performing a ritual, he said. I saw her blood touch the stone. Blackstone didn't deny it. She only sighed deeply, like someone remembering a debt they never meant to pay. My father made the first deal. He offered the camp in exchange for prosperity, for protection. She stared out the window toward the totem by the lake. But when the offering was missed 20 years ago, it began to rot. Sam stepped forward. You're saying this camp, these deaths, have been happening on purpose? Blackstone nodded. Every 2 decades, the lake demands souls. Mason grabbed the axe from under the bed. We're burning. It, all of it. We torch the totems, we torch the chapel, and we leave. Fire won't kill what's underneath, Blackstone warned. I don't care. Let it burn. The group split up. Mason and Sam headed for the mess hall to gather fuel and matches. Lena went to retrieve the ritual book from the chapel basement. Blackstone remained in the cabin, allegedly to gather supplies, but as the others left, she opened the floorboard beneath her bed. Inside was a mask made of polished bone, stitched with faded twine. She ran her fingers along its edge and smiled. In the woods, Mason and Sam moved fast. The fog was thicker than ever now, twisting into fingers, sliding across the dirt, clinging to their clothes. They broke open locked doors, spilled kerosene, and smashed furniture for kindling. At the same time, Lena descended into the chapel basement. The book was gone. But something else had been left behind. A knife, ancient and carved with symbols, lying in a pool of black water that hadn't been there before. As she picked it up, a whisper filled the room. Only blood ends blood. She turned. No one was there, yet her shadow didn't match her movements anymore. Back at the lake, Sam and Mason poured fuel around the totem stones. They struck a match and watched the first blaze rise into the mist. That's when they heard it. A scream. It came from the chapel. They ran. But it wasn't Lena screaming. It was Blackstone. They found her sprawled on the chapel steps, blood dripping from her temple. She was laughing. "You're too late," she whispered. From the woods they came. Figures. 5 of them, draped in rotting clothes, their heads tilted. Silent. Masked. One wore a deer skull. Another wore stitched bark. But one stood apart. Taller. Unmoving. The same mask from Bryce's phone. The masked figure. He stepped forward. Behind him, the trees swayed without wind. The hunt had begun. Mason threw the first torch. Flames swept through the underbrush, catching totems, dead trees, and the chapel porch. The masked figures didn't flinch. They only moved faster. Sam and Lena ran, but Mason stayed. "I'll hold them off," he shouted. Sam refused, but he pushed her away. He swung the axe once, twice. Then they were on him. Sam and Lena ran through the camp. The cabins were aflame now, smoke choking the sky. Somewhere, behind them, Mason screamed once, then went silent. The two reached the lake. The fire reflected across its surface like veins. Lena held the ritual knife tightly. "We have to end the seal," she said. "Not destroy it. Complete it." "How?" Sam asked. "The book said an offering of willing blood." Lena looked into the water. "I think it has to be me," Sam protested. Begged, but Lena stepped forward. She slit her palm. Let the blood drip into the water. The lake shivered. The sky pulsed. Then something rose. The entity. It wasn't a creature. It was a shape. A man without features, made of rippling darkness, wearing a bone mask. The masked figure stepped forward and knelt before Lena. and whispered, "Daughter of the seal, we remember you." Lena's eyes turned black, her voice not her own. "Then take me." She stepped into the lake. The surface swallowed her, like she had never existed. The wind returned, the fire died down, the totems collapsed, and the forest went still. Sam stood alone on the shore, and Blackstone was gone. A week later, the police found the ruins of Camp Dagger Lake. All cabins burned. No bodies recovered. Only one survivor, Samantha Graves, found unconscious at the lake's edge. She never spoke again, but when questioned, she simply turned her head toward the water and smiled. 7 days later, the fire had long gone out. What remained was ash, scorched soil, and the blackened ribs of cabins that once held laughter, secrets, and death. Dagger Lake was declared a tragic accident site, a freak forest blaze, a failed school retreat. No further comment. The authorities recovered no bodies, no bones, no teeth. Just one girl, Samantha Graves, curled up on the lake's rocky edge, soaked, shivering, lips stained with blood that wasn't her own. She was silent for 3 full days, and then she began to speak, but not in English. She was placed in a private psychiatric care unit in Pine Hollow County. Doctors said she was stable, physically unharmed, but mentally fractured. She didn't respond to her name. She drew symbols on the bike walls with her fingernails. She whispered to puddles on the floor. The staff began to rotate more frequently. Complaints of shadows moving near her bed, lights flickering when she spoke. One nurse quit after seeing a reflection in the hallway mirror, a figure behind Sam that wasn't there when she turned around. Still, Sam remained calm, as if she were waiting. A social worker visited, young, naive, new. He brought her a bottle of water, some snacks, and a small handheld mirror for grooming. "Try to smile," he said. "The worst is behind you." Sam looked into the mirror and blinked. For a fraction of a second, her reflection didn't match. It was Lena. Dripping. Eyes black. Mouth stitched shut. Then it was gone. Sam placed the mirror face down without a word. Meanwhile, across town, 2 boys went missing near the county reservoir. Their bikes were found beside the water, tires still warm, footprints leading to the shore, but none leading away. A ranger followed the shoreline until he found something half buried in the mud, a totem, newly carved, still damp. That night, Sam began humming in her room. The tune was old, wrong, like a lullaby sung backwards. The mirror on her desk cracked. Something stirred. The ashes of the chapel shifted. Roots curled around the bones of forgotten campers. The seal, once broken, now reformed, beat like a heart. And deep below, in a hollow space untouched by man, the masked figure knelt. Not in rest, but in prayer. Waiting, feeding, remembering. Sam was released. She spoke calmly now, said she wanted to move forward. She returned to her hometown, a quiet place, surrounded by trees. She never used mirrors, never touched running water. And every night before bed, she placed a small circle of salt around her door. One evening, as thunder cracked in the distance, she looked out her window and saw it, a shape, tall, still, masked, standing just across the street, not moving, not even breathing, just watching. She blinked. It was gone, but a single drop of lake water slid down her window from the inside. Sam sat on the edge of her bed, hands folded, eyes forward, and with a calm, empty voice, she whispered to the darkness in her room, "You can come in now. I remember the rules." The candle flickered, and the room went silent. Michael Voss was everything a woman might dream of marrying: handsome, intelligent, poised, and unfailingly polite. He said all the right things, did all the right things, remembered anniversaries before they even happened. But perfection is rarely natural and never safe. The neighborhood adored him. He trimmed the hedges. He waved at passing cars. He walked their golden retriever with exact punctuality every evening, 6:15 p.m. sharp, regardless of weather. But in the quiet moments between smiles, there were shadows, glitches. Hannah Voss was the only one who noticed them. The first came on a Tuesday. Michael was cooking. The oil in the pan had popped, violently, splashing onto the back of his hand. Skin blistered instantly, turning red, bubbling along the knuckles. Hannah gasped and rushed for cold water. But Michael didn't flinch, didn't wince, didn't even look down. He stirred the food calmly, as if the pain weren't real, then turned to her with a casual smile. All good. The next morning, the burn was gone. No mark, no redness, not even a scar. She told herself it was nothing. People heal fast. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe she imagined it. But doubt is like mold. It thrives in silence. Later that week, Michael came home with blood on his collar. It wasn't his. When asked, he said a coworker had a nosebleed. But he had no coworker by that name. She checked. That night, Hannah watched him sleep. He didn't move. Not once. Not a twitch. Not a breath audible. He lay there, perfectly still, eyes twitching beneath closed lids as if dreaming things he couldn't forget. By the second week, her smiles at dinner were forced. By the third, she began watching him when he wasn't supposed to be seen. He left, early on Sundays, always between 4 and 4:15 a.m., always dressed in black, always without explanation. She followed him. One cold morning, she trailed him through the neighborhood and beyond, into a wooded trail that led toward the industrial district. Michael walked without hesitation, without looking back, as if he didn't believe he could be followed, as if he didn't care. He stopped at a clearing. The dirt had been disturbed, recently. He dug with his hands. 30 minutes later, he pulled out a metal lockbox the size of a shoebox and opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens, each of a different woman, different eras, different hairstyles, different cities, but each one looked like Hannah. Same face, same eyes, same soft, uncertain smile. She stepped backward in shock and snapped a twig. Michael turned instantly, but she was already gone. That night, she didn't sleep. She stared at him from the hallway as he brushed. His teeth, perfect posture, robotic movements. His gaze met hers in the mirror for a second longer than it should have. Then he smiled. "Hannah, are you all right?" The next day, she hired a private investigator, Ronald Fletcher, a retired homicide detective known for looking into the things normal people shouldn't see. He was skeptical, until she showed him photos of the lockbox she had secretly taken with her phone. One of the women in the photos had the date 1983 written in ink on the back. The woman looked no older than 25, and she looked exactly like Hannah. Fletcher began digging. Within 2 days, he called in a panic. "Your husband doesn't exist," he said. "No records before 2012. No birth certificate. The ID is a federal-level fake. Hannah, I don't know who you married, but it's not who he says he is." Then the line went dead. She never heard from him again. That night, a package arrived on their doorstep. Inside was Fletcher's phone. It had been smashed, crushed, as if stepped on with more force than any normal person could produce. She looked up to see Michael standing in the kitchen making tea, smiling. "Strange package?" She nodded. He smiled wider. "I'll handle it." 3 days later, she decided to leave. She packed a bag while he was at work, but he came home early. Found her at the door, and for the first time, he looked disappointed. "Going somewhere?" Hannah stuttered, lied, said she was visiting her mother. Michael stepped forward and touched her cheek gently. "I know when you're lying," he whispered, then turned and walked away. That night, she woke up to the sound of nothing. The dog wasn't barking, the fridge wasn't humming, the house was silent. She got up and walked to the bathroom. Inside, the mirror had fogged over, though no one had showered. She wiped it and saw her reflection, smiling, but she wasn't. Behind her, the shadow of a man stood tall, not moving. She turned. No one. The next morning, she found the dog. Dead. Neck twisted. Michael said it was an accident, that he had found the poor thing lying at the bottom of the basement stairs. But his eyes didn't blink when he said it. And his shirt had a single bloodstain near the collar, the exact same spot as before. She locked herself in the guest bedroom that night and called Lydia, her best friend. I think he's not human," she whispered. Lydia didn't laugh. She just said, "I'll come get you in the morning." At 3:33 a.m., the bedroom doorknob turned, slowly, deliberately, then stopped. Footsteps walked away. In the morning, Michael was making breakfast, flipping pancakes, wearing the same smile, no blood, no bruises, just those same perfect hands. "Sleep well?" he asked. Hannah nodded. Barely. Rain tapped against the windows as dusk bled across the sky. The world dimmed early that day, as if night couldn't wait to arrive. Hannah sat in the living room, clutching her phone like a lifeline, playing Fletcher's last voicemail over and over. His voice crackled beneath distortion. "He's not who he says. Hannah, don't let him know you know." Then silence. Then a faint sound in the background. Something wet. Something snapping. And then nothing. She tried calling back. Straight to voicemail. She texted. The bubbles never appeared. By midnight, she drove to his office on the edge of the city. The lights were out. The door was unlocked. Inside, the place looked untouched. No signs of a struggle, no chaos, just emptiness. Like no one had been there. In weeks. On the desk sat a sealed envelope with her name written in ink. Inside were 3 photos. One from 1995. A photo of a smiling couple at a wedding. The groom, Michael Voss. One from 2001. A passport scan. Same face, new name. One from 2007. A newspaper clipping from Denver. Man survives 4-story fall with no injuries. The photo showed Michael, unaged, unchanged. But the most disturbing was the last one. A security cam image from a hospital time-stamped 3 days ago. Fletcher, face bloodied, running down a hallway. Behind him, Michael, expression blank. Shirt soaked in red, not running, just walking. The next morning, Hannah sat across from Michael at breakfast. He made toast and orange juice. "How's Fletcher?" he asked suddenly, not looking up. Her heart stopped. "I haven't heard from him." Michael smiled. "People like him usually disappear, don't they?" The toast popped from the toaster. The smell of burnt bread filled the room. She started, sleeping with a knife under her pillow, checking locks twice, watching windows for movement. But Michael always seemed one step ahead. One night, she found her laptop open, though she had turned it off before bed. On the screen was a single tab, a website titled Project Enoch, Classified Biological Engineering, 1994. The page disappeared when she tried to refresh. She looked up. Michael stood in the doorway. Having trouble sleeping? She closed the laptop. Nodded. The next day, she drove to the university archives and found the name. Dr. Edwin Harrow, formerly of the Vantech Biology Division, listed as lead researcher in Project Enoch, terminated in 1995 after a lab incident. No further details, no published work, but the address listed was still valid. She drove there at dusk, a crumbling cottage on the outskirts of the forest. Weeds tangled through the steps, the windows were covered with foil. A sign on the door read, "No trespassing, private property, leave." She knocked, footsteps, a pause. Then the door opened a crack. A man with sunken eyes and trembling hands peered out. "Who sent you?" "Ron Fletcher," she replied. The door opened wider. Inside, the walls were lined with boxes, books, and diagrams of human anatomy mixed with something else. Cells too dense, bone structure unbreakable, nervous systems redesigned. Dr. Edwin Harrow poured a drink and began to speak. "You're married to one of them." "One of what?" "They were designed for war. Genetically altered. Prototypes. 7 of them. Enhanced. Engineered. But something went wrong." He paused. "They stopped listening. They stopped dying." She asked about Michael. Dr. Harrow walked to a locked filing cabinet, removed a file labeled Subject 6 Michael, and opened it. Pages of test results. Notes written in panic. A photo from the lab. Michael strapped to a chair, eyes open, smiling as doctors tried to sedate him. He was different, Harrow said. The others were violent, but controllable. He was quiet, observant. He learned how to imitate, how to become someone's perfect partner. He leaned in close. He doesn't feel love. He performs it. Hannah left shaking, drove for hours, lost track of time. When she returned home, the lights were off, the door was open. Inside, Michael sat at the kitchen table, candles lit, wine glasses filled, dinner on the table. "Welcome home," he said softly. "How was your day?" She said nothing. Michael stood and walked to her, took her hand, held it gently, and said with a warm, loving tone, "You shouldn't talk to men like Harrow. They fill your head with things that aren't true." Her heart froze. "I didn't—" He touched a finger to her lips. "Shh." Behind him, a drop of blood slid down his collar. That night, she packed a bag again. This time she called Lydia, begged her to come now. Lydia agreed. But when she arrived, Michael was already waiting. He answered the door with a warm smile. "Sorry," he said. "She's sleeping." Lydia narrowed her eyes. "I'll wait." Michael nodded. "Of course." He stepped aside. Lydia never saw Hannah, but she did see something else. In the trash can near the porch, beneath crumpled paper and old flowers, was a bloodied watch. Fletcher's. She left without saying a word. The next morning, Hannah woke to a perfect breakfast. French toast, strawberries, warm coffee. Michael sat across from her, smiling. "I had the strangest dream," he said. "I was in a lab, cold, alone, strapped to a table." He laughed. "But I woke up, and you were there." He reached for her hand, and in that moment, she realized the truth. This thing wasn't dreaming. It was remembering. That night, Hannah stared into the bathroom mirror and whispered her own name, just to remember who she was. And in the reflection, her husband stood behind her. Though the room was empty, he didn't blink, didn't move, just watched. From the glass, smiling. The house felt smaller now, every hallway tighter, every room darker. The lights flickered too often, the pipes groaned in the night, and when Hannah walked past mirrors, she sometimes saw two of her husband instead of one. Michael had become impossible to read, smiling in all the wrong places, watching when she wasn't looking, answering questions before she asked them. His footsteps made no sound anymore, and she hadn't seen him bleed in weeks. She waited until he left for work, then picked the lock on his study. The room had always been locked. He said it was just paperwork, but inside there were no tacks, forms, no files, just a steel filing cabinet with fingerprints etched around the handle and an old floor safe bolted beneath the rug. It took her 2 hours to pry the safe open. Inside was a red leather folder, weathered and aged, stamped on the front in faded print. Subject: 6. Serial observation, 1983, present. The contents turned her blood to ice: photographs, passports, fake marriage certificates. 9 women, different cities, different names. Each one resembled Hannah, and each one vanished after 2 to 3 years. Their faces smiled on paper, but the last photos of each looked wrong, pale, hollow, some with bruises half covered by makeup. One appeared unconscious in the back of a car. Each file ended with a single stamped word: retired. Behind the folder was something else, a velvet box. Inside, a necklace, old, tarnished. When she lifted it, a bloodstain ran down the inside of the chain. Hannah dropped it. The box beneath held teeth. Human, filed smooth, numbered. That night she confronted him, or tried to. She entered the living room with the folder in her hands, heart pounding. Michael sat on the couch, reading a book, the same page he'd been on for days. She threw the file at his feet. "What is this?" He looked at the folder, then at her, calmly, softly. He spoke without blinking. "It's my past. I wanted you to find it." She backed away. "You killed them. I retired them." "What does that mean?" Michael stood, not fast, but with gravity, as though the air resisted his movement. "It means they stopped being interesting." That night, she ran. Took nothing but her wallet and keys. But halfway down the street, a black car pulled out from nowhere and blocked her path. 2 men stepped out, well-dressed, unmoving, pale as statues. Their eyes were empty, their voices hollow. "You need to come with us, Mrs. Voss." She was taken to a cabin in the forest. Inside were 3 other men. Each looked like Michael, not identical but eerily similar. All emotionless, all still. Each watched her without blinking. They called themselves the Others. One of them, taller, older, spoke. "You are Subject 6's current partner. He's experimenting." "Experimenting?" she whispered. "To see if affection can override the instinct." "What instinct?" The man blinked for the first time. "To consume." They showed her photos, a long table. Dozens of women, all missing, all failed bonding attempts, all dead. "You're the longest to survive," the tall one said. "He finds you. Curious." Back at the house, Michael paced. His hand rested over the fireplace mantel, still and calm. A slow grin spread across his face. He whispered to the dark. She ran. He looked up at a security camera blinking red in the corner of the room. "But she'll come back." Hannah escaped the cabin with help from a hiker, someone who saw her flee into the woods and heard her screams. He called the police. They found no cabin, no men. Just a half-buried steel door in the ground, locked tight. It vanished 2 days later. She returned to Dr. Harrow, bloodied and exhausted. He told her what she already feared. "Michael is not like us. He was the first one to break free. The first to evolve beyond control. He doesn't age. He doesn't sleep. He doesn't feel guilt. Hannah broke down. I think I loved him. Dr. Harrow shook his head. You loved what he pretended to. B. As she left the doctor's home, he gave her a key. To the original lab, he said. If you want the truth, if you want to stop him, it's in there. But be warned, Mrs. Voss. He looked at her, eyes hollow. You're not the first to try. That night, back in her hotel, Hannah turned on the faucet to wash her face. The mirror steamed, and on the fogged glass, a message appeared. I forgive you. She spun around. The room was empty, but the carpet behind her was damp, as if someone had just stepped out of the shower. The road to the old Vantech facility was swallowed by fog and time. Once hidden in the mountains, the lab had been buried by scandal, lawsuits, and government red tape. The forest tried to take it back. Trees pierced through old fencing. Moss grew across cracked pavement. But the key Harrow gave her worked. The rusted door groaned open, and the cold hit her like a grave opening. Inside, darkness had its own weight. Stale air, metallic, sharp, and a smell beneath it all. Chemical rot mixed with something that had once been alive. The lights didn't work, but her flashlight revealed what the world had forgotten. Old surgical rooms, with restraints built for people who couldn't die. Observation tanks, long drained, lined the hallways like tombs. Some still had claw marks on the inside of the glass. Room 3B was the first real clue. A sign read, Subject 6, isolate and record. Maintain psychological integrity. Inside were dozens of photographs taped to the walls. Faces, mostly women, all resembling Hannah. Next to each one were notes, handwritten by researchers. Attachment lasted 4 months. Subject attempted bonding, failed. Subject shows mimicked grief, no genuine response. Eyes dilate when spoken to about death, not fear, fascination. One final note sat alone at the bottom of the wall. Subject 6 now selects his own targets. In the next room, she found the feeding records. Hannah read them slowly, barely breathing. They didn't require food, but they did require something else. Pain. The tissue in their bodies regenerated faster when exposed to adrenaline, and nothing released more adrenaline than fear. The others didn't eat flesh. They fed on terror. The fear of their victims nourished something deep inside, kept them young, stable. A sound echoed through the corridor, a slow, dragging step. She turned off the flashlight, waited, then a whisper. Is it you? She didn't move. I remember you. You were the one from New York. Or was it Boston? A man stepped from the shadows, shirtless, covered in scars, face pale and stretched thin. One eye cloudy. He smiled. Not kindly. You're his, aren't you? The favorite. Hannah stepped back. Who are you? Subject 2, he replied. I was the prototype, the one who felt too much. He tapped his head. They tried to fix that, cut the feelings out, but it didn't work. So they left me down here, with the others. He pointed to the tanks. Some still had shapes inside, not moving, but not dead. Subject 2 limped closer. I could help you, he whispered, but not for free. She ran before he finished, down the corridor, into the dark, her feet echoing against tile, her lungs burning. Behind her, he laughed. Not like a man, but like something that remembered how a man once laughed. She burst into the archive chamber, sealed from time. Inside, rows of metal drawers and digital tapes. One tape had Michael's face on the label, Subject 6. Final evolution log. She found an old terminal and played the footage. The video crackled. A young scientist, Dr. Harrow, sat at a table. Michael was strapped to a chair behind him, eyes wide, smiling faintly. "We've tried to sedate him," Harrow said. "But he resists, not chemically, psychologically. He wants to stay awake." Michael whispered something. The camera picked it up. "If I sleep, I forget who I'm supposed to be." The tape ended abruptly. Static. Then one final frame. Michael standing behind the camera, grinning, unstrapped. Back at home, Michael set the table for two. Candles lit, silverware placed precisely, a record played in the background, an old jazz track that had played the night Hannah first told him she loved him. He stood by the window, watching the driveway, waiting. That night, Hannah returned to her motel to find the door unlocked. Inside, her things untouched, except one item. On the pillow sat a necklace, her mother's. It had been missing for 3 weeks, and beneath it, a single note in handwriting she knew too well. "You forgot this." "I remembered," she screamed, packed her bags, and left the city. But the others were already following her. At a rest stop 2 hours out, she saw one. In the mirror above the sink, standing behind her, not blinking, not breathing, just watching. She ran outside to find the parking lot empty, until she turned and found a man sitting on the hood of her car. Tall, dressed in black, smiling. Not Michael. Another one. He tilted his head. "He's calling you back." She drove into the night, into the mountains, and behind her, a shadow followed, step by step, with a smile stitched into its face. The next morning, Michael stood in front of the burned fireplace, tying a tie. He stared into the mirror, and said calmly, "She'll be home soon." Behind him, the reflection moved differently. It wasn't his, but it smiled the same. The house hadn't changed. The flowers on the porch were still watered. The light over the front door still flickered like a broken heartbeat. And inside, the clock still ticked as if time hadn't stopped the night Hannah ran. But something was different. The silence was no longer empty. It was watching. Hannah stood in the entryway, soaked from rain, shoes leaving dark prints across the hardwood. Her eyes swept the familiar hallway, every picture, every inch of decor exactly as she remembered. Only, the photos were wrong. Each one now held a different version of her. Same face, different clothing, different decades. And in each one, Michael stood beside her, unchanged, grinning, unaging, undying. She stepped further inside. The smell was stronger now. Not rot. Not blood. Something worse. Memory. It hung in the air like perfume from a corpse. She opened the coat closet and found it extended deeper than before. At the back was a square metal hatch, flush with the floor, a steel ring, a pull handle. She grabbed it, lifted, and descended into the hidden basement. The staircase was narrow, carved into concrete. No dust, no webs. This place had been used, often. The bottom was a single hallway lit by low red lights humming faintly. The walls were lined with jars, dozens of them, each containing organic matter, fingers, locks of hair, preserved hearts, sealed in liquid like trophies. On the far wall hung a massive board covered in clippings. IDs, marriage certificates, obituaries, all leading back to Michael. At the center, a Polaroid of Hannah, asleep, her face peaceful. Labeled, "Final Candidate." She turned and found a door, cold metal, keypad locked, but the keypad had no numbers, only letters. She typed her name. The door clicked open. Inside, the room was warm, too warm. At the center was an altar built from old floorboards, wedding rings and burned photo frames. On top sat a book, handwritten, bound in skin. She opened it. Inside were journal entries. Michael's. The others failed. They broke too easily. But Hannah, she listens. She forgives. She fears. So beautifully. Her terror makes me feel human. She must stay. She must love me back, even if I have to carve the shape of love into her soul. This is not obsession. This is evolution. She closed the book. The floor creaked behind her. Michael stood in the doorway, tie loosened, shirt stained, eyes glowing faintly. "I hoped you'd find it," he said. Hannah backed against the altar. "Why?" He stepped closer. "Because now you know I'm telling the truth. I never lied. Not once." She trembled. "You're not human," he nodded. "Not anymore." He knelt slowly, almost reverently. "You're the first one to come back. That means something." She pulled a knife from her coat. A gift from Harrow. Silver, etched with symbols. Michael didn't move. He only smiled. "If you stab me, I'll forgive you." She lunged, buried the blade in his chest, twisted. He shuddered, then chuckled. Blood dripped, but only a little. Not red, black, thick, like oil. It sizzled against the floor. Michael stood, blade still in his chest. "You can't kill me, Hannah. But you can be part of me." He opened his arms. Behind him the altar caught fire. She ran. Through the hall, up the stairs. The fire followed. It clung to the walls like it had been waiting. The living room burst into flame. Pictures blackened. Smoke screamed. Michael walked calmly after her, unburned, unharmed. Bleeding shadows. She reached the front door, turned, lit a match, dropped it into the trail of gasoline she had poured earlier. The flames exploded. Behind her, she ran. From the street, she watched the house burn, watched the windows glow like eyes, heard the wood scream as it cracked and fell, and through the flames, she saw his silhouette, still standing, still smiling. But then, he collapsed. Not in pain, but like a puppet with its strings cut, falling slowly, finally. Sirens howled in the distance. Fire trucks, police, neighbors. Lights, noise, chaos. But Hannah sat, silently across the street, watching her life burn down, and wondering if it would be enough. 3 hours later, they searched the ruins. Found nothing. No body, no trace. Just a wedding ring fused into the floor. Still warm. The house had burned for 7 hours. By the time the last flame died, nothing stood but a hollow. Frame and bones of steel. Fire marshals found no body. Investigators found no record of the man who lived there. Michael Voss, it seemed, had never existed at all. Only Hannah remained. And even she wasn't whole anymore. In the weeks that followed, she stayed in a hospital bed wrapped in gauze and silence. Burns on her arms, smoke in her lungs. But the worst, damage was somewhere else, deeper, untouchable. Doctors came and went. Detectives asked questions. Reporters camped outside. But Hannah said little. Only one sentence repeated whenever someone asked about Michael. "He's still out there." The news said otherwise. Wife escapes fire. Husband presumed dead. Tragic. Domestic accident. No evidence of foul play. But the quiet ones knew. The orderlies who heard her whisper in the dark. The night nurse who found her standing by the mirror at 3 a.m., smiling at something behind her. The cleaner who quit, after finding a bloody footprint outside her room, even though no one had entered or left. She was discharged after 22 days. A recommendation to start over. A new town. A new apartment. a new identity if she wanted. They gave her a list of support groups. She threw it away. 1 month later, Hannah moved into a small coastal town with more rain than people. A place where no one asked questions. She changed her hair, started using her middle name, but the house next door had motion lights, and they always flickered at exactly 3:33 a.m. She tried to move on. She really did. Walked in the sun, went to grocery stores, read books. But sometimes in the reflection of windows, she would see him, not standing, not moving, just there, watching, unblinking, like he was still part of her world, part of her memory, part of her. One night she found a package at her doorstep, no return address. Inside was a photograph, old, faded, a woman in black and white, posing with a man. The man was Michael. The woman looked like Hannah. Written on the back, New York, 1939. First one. She dropped it, burned it, but the smoke smelled like their wedding day. She installed cameras in every room. One morning, she reviewed the footage. At 3 a.m., her bedroom door opened. She didn't move. She didn't wake. But the camera caught a shape, tall, still, tilting its head, watching her sleep. And then, whispering. No mouth moved, but the audio hissed with a voice. I missed you. The next day, she fled again. New city, new name, another reset. But when she plugged in her phone at a roadside diner, it connected to a Wi-Fi signal called Hello Hannah, 6. She left her meal behind and drove for hours. No destination, just away, always away. 6 months later, a man moved into a quiet neighborhood 3 states north. He smiled at neighbors. He walked his dog. He paid in cash. He said his name was Daniel Gray. He opened a small antiques shop on Main Street, and he wore a wedding ring. Across town, a woman named Erin sat alone in her apartment, recovering from a bad breakup. She had a soft voice, a kind face, eyes like Hannah's. One day the man in the shop helped her carry a package to her car. He smiled, introduced himself, and said, "You look familiar." The wind picked up. Leaves scattered, and far away, in a burned-down town no one remembered, something stirred beneath a floor that no longer existed. A black heartbeat. Slow. Patient. Remembering. Hannah woke in a motel bed. The mirror across the room reflected her face, but standing behind her was no one. And yet, she still whispered aloud, "I know you're there." The mirror did not blink, but something in the glass smiled. In the quiet city of Elmridge, autumn had just begun to paint the streets in hues of amber and rust. The air had a hint of chill, and leaves whispered like secrets beneath hurried footsteps. Emily Walker, a 24-year-old literature student, was finishing her thesis in a candlelit apartment that smelled of old books and lavender tea. Her phone rang sharply, shattering the stillness. The caller ID read, "Harrison State Psychiatric Hospital," confused. And alarmed, she answered, "Is this Miss Emily Walker?" "Yes," she replied, heart skipping. "Who is this?" "This is Dr. Jensen. I'm calling about your mother, Grace Walker. I'm afraid she suffered a psychological episode while visiting a place called Ravensmore. She was found alone in a hotel room, unresponsive, and in a state of extreme distress." Emily froze. Her mother had been fine just a week ago, sending cheerful voice notes and talking about following some dream. She hadn't mentioned going to Ravensmore. She's stable but catatonic. We found strange drawings in her hotel room. We need you to come. 2 days later, Emily stood outside Granger House Inn, a fading 3-story building in the center of Ravensmore. a village hidden deep in the forested valleys. The sky above was pale and flat, like a stretched animal skin, and the wind whispered through the bare trees with unnatural calm. Victor Granger, the innkeeper, greeted her. A tall, sun-wrinkled man with clouded eyes and a smile that didn't reach his face. "You must be Miss Walker," he said, voice gravelly. "Your mother stayed in room 7. Emily nodded, unsure how to react to his stare. Something about his demeanor felt studied, like he was watching her for signs. Inside, the inn smelled of pine wood, old smoke, and something bitter, like iron. The wallpaper peeled in places, and the air was colder than outside. As she walked up the creaking stairs, a raven cawed in the distance. Room 7 was dimly lit. The bed was neatly made, but on the desk sat a thick sketchbook. Emily hesitated before opening it. What she saw made her breath catch. Pages filled with disturbing drawings. A deer with pitch-black eyes and human hands. A woman with a bird's skull instead of a face. A forest burning beneath a full red moon. And one phrase, written again and again. "It waits beneath the roots." That night, Emily lay on the same bed her mother had used. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The wind outside howled unnaturally, and the walls creaked like they were breathing. Then the dream came. She was standing in a forest at night. The trees around her bled sap like veins had been sliced. Crows perched silently in the branches. Ahead stood a deer, its body tall and still. But its face, it wasn't animal. It was a human face, pale, lifeless, and smiling. She tried to scream. The forest absorbed the sound. Suddenly, the deer spoke. Blood remembers. Emily woke up, drenched in sweat. Her heart raced. The clock read 3:33 a.m. From the hallway she heard footsteps, slow, dragging. She stepped out. No one was there. The next morning she met Rachel Whitmore, a local historian and librarian. Rachel was in her late 40s, kind-eyed but cautious. Over tea, Emily asked her about the town's past. Rachel hesitated. "Ravensmore doesn't talk about the past," she said softly. "But your mother. She came here asking about her real family." Emily blinked. "What do you mean?" "My mother was adopted?" Rachel nodded. "Her biological family lived here, the Elwoods, but they disappeared after something happened during the Ravens Festival 40 years ago." Emily pressed for details, but Rachel clammed up. "Ask too much, and the town sees you as part of the curse." That evening, Emily returned to her room, mind buzzing. On her pillow was a single black feather. She hadn't left the window open. In the days that followed, Emily began having waking visions. Shadows that weren't cast by light, whispers when no one was near. The dreams worsened. Always the forest. Always the deer. And once she saw her mother, young and crying, standing among trees, whispering, "He never died. He waits." She found Grace's journal hidden behind a loose board. In the room, it was filled with fragments. "The deer is not real. It's older than God. Victor lied. He was there. Margaret Granger keeps the bones beneath the chapel." Emily's hands trembled as she closed the book. The Grangers, they weren't just innkeepers. They were witnesses, maybe even accomplices. That night, Emily was pulled from sleep by a low thud. She opened her eyes to see her closet door ajar. Slowly, cautiously, she approached. Inside, there was no clothing, just a small black box tied with red string. She unwrapped it. Inside was a lock of gray hair, and a tiny doll made of straw and twigs, its face stitched with a bleeding mouth. Suddenly, a voice behind her said, "She left it here when she screamed." Emily turned sharply. No one. But in the mirror, for just a second, she saw her mother's reflection. Eyes hollow, mouth wide in a silent scream. The next morning, Emily decided to confront Victor. "I know about the Elwoods," she said. "I know Grace was one of them. What happened to them?" Victor paused. His eyes darkened. "Some roots are better left undisturbed," he replied. "Dig too deep and something might answer." Before she could reply, Margaret Granger stepped into view, holding a tray of tea. She smiled with cracked lips. "Careful, dear. You might end up just like your mother." That evening, Emily found her mother sitting up in the hospital bed, eyes open for the first time. Her mouth moved, forming words too quiet to hear. Emily leaned closer. "Run," Grace whispered. "He knows you're here." Later that night, Emily wandered the town's edge and found an overgrown path marked Elwood Forest. She followed it. The deeper she went, the more the trees seemed to lean inward, closing around her like ribs. At the heart of the forest, she saw the ruins of an old stone chapel, covered in moss. Inside, she found an altar. Beneath it, something was buried. She dug with her bare hands and found a child's skull, wrapped in a cloth with the Elwood family crest. Suddenly the forest fell silent, and a familiar voice whispered behind her, "Now you remember." The following morning dawned gray and wet. A thick fog clung to the trees like a shroud, and the streets of Ravensmoor seemed emptier than before. Emily stood at the window of room 7, staring down at the inn's overgrown garden. Beneath its beauty, something gnawed at her gut, a feeling of being watched, weighed, and judged. The town had secrets, and Granger House, it was hiding something rotten beneath its walls. Emily began her day with a trip to the local library, housed in an old schoolhouse that smelled of mildew and forgotten paper. Rachel Whitmore was already there, brushing dust from a pile of ledgers. She greeted Emily with a tight smile. "You're still here," Rachel said. "Most people leave Ravensmoor after one night." "I'm not most people," Emily replied. "My mother didn't just have a breakdown. Something happened to her here. I need to know what." Rachel hesitated. Then she slid a book across the counter, a tattered town registry. "Start with this. But be careful. Not all names want to be remembered." Back in her room that evening, Emily opened the registry and flipped to the year 1981. Her mother would have been around 8. There it was, the Elwood family. Jonah Elwood, deceased, 1981. Miriam Elwood, deceased, 1981. Grace Elwood, sent to orphanage in West Helm, adopted following the incident. Beneath their entry was a scribbled note. "See Raven's Festival file. Sealed." Emily's hands trembled. What happened during that festival? That night, sleep didn't come easily. The wind carried the faint sound of children singing. Emily looked out the window and saw a group of kids down the lane, dancing around a wooden effigy with sticks for arms and antlers on its head. She rushed downstairs, but by the time she reached the street, the children were gone. In their place stood a bundle of straw, tied with red string. Inside was another doll, just like the one in the closet. But this one had her mother's name stitched into its chest. Unable to sleep, Emily wandered through the dim hallways of the inn. The building creaked and sighed like it was alive. Paintings lined the walls, bleak landscapes, faceless portraits, and one particularly strange piece. A dark forest with a burning stag in the center, surrounded by masked figures. She leaned closer and noticed something chilling. One of the masked figures in the painting wore the exact same pendant her mother owned, a crescent moon etched with a black feather. Suddenly, the light flickered, and in the glass frame, Emily saw a second reflection behind her, tall, antlered, and smiling. When she turned, no one was there. The next day, she confronted Margaret Granger in the dining hall. "My mother stayed here as a child, didn't she?" Emily asked. "You knew her." Margaret, now pouring tea with hands as steady as ice, said nothing for a moment. Then, softly, "She was a quiet child, sensitive. The woods spoke to her." "What happened during the Ravens Festival?" Margaret's eyes narrowed. "That's not a story we tell, not even to ourselves." Emily leaned in. "What happened to her parents?" Margaret didn't flinch. "Some seeds must never grow again." Later, Emily searched the attic. Dust filled her lungs as she stepped over old trunks and cobwebs. In the corner, she found an old toy chest with the initials GE burned into the side, Grace Elwood. Inside were children's books, drawings, and a wooden deer mask. She turned it over and found a dried brownish stain on the inside. Blood? Age? She wasn't sure, but taped beneath the mask was a photo. Grace, as a little girl, standing in front of the inn. Beside her stood Victor Granger, much younger, but still cold-eyed. And around them were others, smiling townsfolk, all wearing antlers. That night, Emily's dreams were louder. She was in the forest again, but this time the deer with the human face wasn't alone. A group of hooded figures surrounded it, chanting in a guttural language. The ground beneath them writhed, like roots twisting under skin. Suddenly, she was part of them, wearing the wooden mask, holding hands with the others, and in the center of the circle was a little girl tied to a tree, crying out, "Mommy, please, don't let them take me." Emily awoke with a scream, and her hands were covered in mud. The next morning, Victor handed her a letter. "No return address," he said. Emily unfolded it. The writing was shaky. "You must leave. The roots go too deep now. If you stay, he will claim you too. R." She knew it had to be Rachel. Emily rushed to the library, but it was closed. The shutters were nailed from the inside. A passerby told her Rachel had a breakdown last night and had been taken to the doctor. But Emily saw the truth in the woman's eyes. Fear. Ravensmoor was closing in. Back at the inn, she found a crawl space beneath the stairwell. The boards were loose. Using a fire poker, she pried them open and crawled inside. The space was cold and damp, lit only by her phone's flashlight. The walls were covered in scratch marks. She moved deeper and found a box wrapped in cloth. Inside were bones. Small, human, and fragile. A child. And a nameplate beside them. Jonah Elwood. Emily staggered back in horror. Victor was standing at the top of the stairs when she emerged. "You shouldn't be down there," he said. "What the hell is this place?" she snapped. He stepped closer. "It's a burial, child. For the past. For peace." Emily stared at him, voice shaking. "You killed them." Victor's face twisted. "We gave them back to the earth. The forest feeds. And it forgives." That night, Emily packed to leave, but the road out of town was blocked by a fallen tree. Her phone had no signal, and her car's engine refused to turn over. Ravensmoor had decided she was not leaving. She returned to her room, and on her pillow was her mother's crescent moon pendant, fresh blood smeared on its chain. From the hallway came a knock, 3 soft taps, then silence. When she opened the door, no one was there, but the smell of burning leaves filled the air. Emily returned to the attic. searching for anything that could tie her mother to this place. Something solid, something undeniable. Beneath the old toy chest, she found a box lined with yellowed newspaper clippings. Most were brittle with age, but one headline stood out. Tragedy at Ravens Festival, Elwood family blamed, May 7, 1981. The article described a fire that had broken out during the annual festival, resulting in multiple deaths, including children. Witnesses claimed the fire had started near the Elwood tent. Grace's parents, Jonah and Miriam, had been declared ritually unstable. The paper implied occult activity, but no investigation had followed. The case was closed by the town council. Beneath the article was a burned photograph. 4 masked figures surrounded a bonfire. One mask was clearly a stag's skull, the others bird-like and horned. Behind them stood a man, face obscured by smoke, tall and thin, holding a child by the arm, written on the back. Ravensmoor protects its own. Rachel Whitmore's house was locked tight, but Emily, desperate, found a way in through the cellar. The air inside was stale, like something had died. Rachel's notes were scattered everywhere, maps of the town, charcoal sketches of the chapel, and dozens of drawings of the deer. In the center of the table sat a worn journal, open to a page marked by a black feather. The Elwoods weren't murderers. They were scapegoats. The fire was planned. The council decided they had to be silenced. Grace was spared because she was too young, but they always feared she'd return. Now, the daughter's here. The roots are awake. Emily flipped the page. Taped inside was a birth certificate. Grace Elwood, born May 7, 1973. But in the margin someone had written, illegitimate, father unknown, suspected, Victor Granger. Emily dropped the journal as if it burned. Victor, who watched her so closely, who lied so easily, who had raised this entire inn as a shrine to silence. Could he be her grandfather or something worse? That evening, Grace spoke again in the hospital, but only in riddles. Emily, don't dig where light won't go, she whispered. He waits under the chapel. Don't let the stag feed again. Emily pressed her for more, but Grace only wept and repeated, blood remembers. Emily decided to return to the ruined chapel. The forest path was darker this time. The trees leaned closer, and the wind carried whispers and voices she couldn't recognize. Halfway there, she passed a wooden scarecrow dressed in an old child's dress. Pinned to its chest was a torn drawing, one of Grace's, showing a woman hanging upside down from the moon, hair trailing like roots. At the chapel ruins, Emily uncovered a stone trapdoor beneath the altar. It wasn't just a ruin. It was a sealed crypt. Inside was darkness and bones, human bones. A circular chamber lay beneath, lined with shelves of skulls. Carvings covered the walls, spirals, deer antlers, burning trees, and children's faces with their mouths sewn shut. In the center stood a stone pedestal, and resting on it, Grace's childhood music box, still playing a slow, broken lullaby. Emily turned to leave, but behind her, someone was waiting. Victor. He stood at the top of the stairs, holding a lantern. You weren't supposed to see this, he said. Emily backed away. Is it true? You knew Grace? You were at the festival? Victor's face twisted. We all were. We voted. We decided what had to be done. You murdered them. They were bringing the curse back. The stag had been silent for a generation, until Jonah and Miriam dug too deep. It was them or the town. He stepped forward. You don't understand. The forest doesn't forget. It demands balance. Every generation must pay. Emily ran, through the woods, blind with fear, chased by shadows and echoes. She reached the inn and locked herself in room 7, heart hammering. That night, the dream was worse. She was tied to the chapel altar. All around her stood masked villagers, chanting, swaying. At the center stood the stag, tall and breathing. But this time, it opened its mouth, and inside was a human face. Grace. Crying, whispering, "Save us." Emily woke up bleeding from her palms. She had clenched her fists so hard, her nails pierced skin. On her bedsheet was a message, scratched into the fabric. "Your blood is the key." The next morning, Margaret Granger brought her breakfast. But Emily didn't touch it. She stared at the woman. "You let it happen. You let them kill a child." Margaret sat slowly. "I had no choice. Ravensmoor is built on bones. The forest doesn't let go of what's buried." Emily stood. "Then I'll dig it all up. Every single lie." Rachel's journal had mentioned a secret room beneath the library, where the original council records were hidden. Emily broke in that night. She found a locked drawer behind a false wall, and inside, an old film reel, photographs, and a letter from 1981. The letter detailed the council's decision to sacrifice the Elwoods, and how Victor, then a rising council member, offered their names in exchange for the forest's silence. The reel showed the ritual. Shaky footage of masked figures dancing in firelight, screams in the background, and then the camera caught Grace, 8 years old, being dragged away crying for her mother. Her captor was Victor. Emily took the evidence and ran, but Ravensmoor was already watching. The trees bent toward her. Crows circled overhead. Her car had been towed. The phone lines were dead. The village square stood empty, abandoned as if time had stopped, and standing in the middle was a new effigy. This time, it wore Emily's face. The effigy stood in the center of Ravensmoor's square, tall as a man and crudely made from sticks and bones. It wore a mask of deer antlers, and stitched across its chest in faded red thread was a name. Emily. She stared in disbelief, her breath frosting in the cold morning air. There were no townsfolk in sight. Doors were bolted shut. Curtains twitched in the windows above. Ravensmoor was no longer pretending. It had chosen her. That night, Emily returned to the Granger house, clutching Rachel's journal and the old council documents she'd found in the library's hidden drawer. Every step inside felt heavier than the last. The inn, once quiet, now groaned and creaked as if restless, alive. Back in room 7, she set the documents on the desk and began piecing together a horrifying truth. Victor Granger wasn't just a council member. He was the founder of the Ravensmoor Blood Pact, an agreement made during a great famine decades ago. The townspeople had turned to an old forest ritual, a sacrifice every 30 years to ensure prosperity and safety. The Elwoods had resisted, and so they had become the offering. Emily's mother, Grace, was the only survivor. As the clock struck 3:33 a.m., the air in her room shifted. Emily felt cold grip her spine. Her vision blurred, and the dream began. But this time, she knew it was a dream, and she couldn't wake up. She stood once more in the chapel ruins, but it was no longer broken. It stood tall, restored, lit by hundreds of candles. The villagers stood in a circle, their masks shifting between animal and human forms. They chanted in a language older than words. In the center, tied to the altar, was her mother, Grace, young and screaming. Victor stepped forward, holding a ceremonial blade made of bone. The crowd chanted louder. Emily screamed, ran to the altar, but found her hands bound. She was wearing the same deer mask she'd found in the attic. Then she heard it again. The stag stepped out of the darkness. Black eyes, human smile, antlers crowned in feathers and fire. Blood remembers, it said, and it is hungry. Emily woke with a start, on the forest floor, in her nightgown, barefoot. Her feet were muddy, Her hands were scratched, and around her, the trees had been carved with runes. The same runes from Grace's sketches. Someone, or something, had walked her into the forest during the night. Back at the inn, she demanded answers. "Why me?" she shouted at Victor in the parlor. "Why my family? What is this curse really about?" Victor's calm facade cracked for the first time. "Because your mother never finished what she was meant to do." He stepped closer. The stag chose her, and she ran. We gave it others in her place, but it remembers, it waits. And now, it's claimed you. Emily backed away. "I'm not part of your twisted ritual," he grinned. "You were born from it." Emily fled to the hospital to see Grace. For the first time in days, her mother looked fully awake. Eyes clear, trembling but aware. "Emily," she whispered, "it's happening again. The festival is tonight." "What festival?" Emily asked. "They'll gather at the chapel ruins, they'll burn the effigy, and if you're still here by midnight, you'll burn too." Emily had a choice: run or fight. She returned to Rachel's house and found more notes, symbols, rituals, names scratched out violently. One phrase repeated over and over: break the altar, sever the roots, spill blood where it began. Emily understood. The altar in the chapel's crypt wasn't just ceremonial. It was a focal point, a prison, a key. She had to destroy it. That night, clouds rolled over the moon as the townspeople gathered in the woods. Faces masked, robes black. They sang the old songs in whispers. Drums beat like a dying heart. Emily moved through the forest with a lantern and a crowbar. Her pulse thundered as she reached the chapel's crypt and descended. The music box still played. She smashed it first. Then, she turned to the altar. As her crowbar struck stone, screams echoed above. The ground shook. Blood seeped from the cracks in the floor, thick and ancient. And then she heard the voice. "You dare break the pact?" She turned. The stag stood behind her, its body pulsing, growing larger. Human faces writhed beneath its skin, screaming in silence. Emily raised the crowbar again, but it was too late. The dream swallowed her whole. She was back at the altar, tied down now. Her hands bled into the stone. The villagers chanted again. Her own face stared down from a mask in the crowd. And then, a voice rang out. "Grace, no more," her mother shouted. "She's not yours." The vision shattered. Emily awoke on the chapel floor. The altar was broken. The stag was gone. And above her the villagers fled through the trees, masks discarded, howling like animals as fire spread from tree to tree. The next morning, the smoke had cleared. The chapel lay in ruins again, this time for good. The town was eerily silent. The festival had ended in chaos. Many had vanished. Granger House was empty. Victor and Margaret were gone. Emily walked alone down the main road, bloodied and shaking, but alive. She had severed the roots, but in her hand, she found a single black feather. The morning after the fire, a strange silence gripped Ravensmoor. The fog had lifted, but the town felt hollow, abandoned. Doors were ajar, windows broken, streets scattered with fragments of burned robes and broken masks. The villagers had vanished as if swallowed by the forest itself. Emily walked slowly through the wreckage of the chapel, her shoes crunching over ash and bones. Her arms and face were scratched, her hands bandaged, and yet she felt something she hadn't in days. Control. But it was short-lived. On the altar, broken just hours before, someone had left a new offering. A black feathered mask, and a note, pinned to it with dried blood. "The roots cannot be severed. You've only made them bleed." Emily returned to Granger House expecting it to be empty, but the front door was wide open, swinging in the breeze. Inside, the inn was still intact. Dust hung in the air like mist. She cautiously climbed the stairs. Room 7 had been stripped bare. No drawings, no journals, no signs her mother had ever stayed. Then she heard footsteps downstairs. Victor. He was waiting in the parlor, sitting in his usual chair, sipping tea as if nothing had happened. "Sit," he said, motioning to the seat across from him. "We should talk." Emily didn't sit. "You lied. You murdered innocent people. You tried to kill me." Victor's expression remained calm. "We did what was necessary to protect Ravensmoor. The forest demanded it. And now, because of you, it's angry." "It was angry because of you," she snapped. "Because you poisoned this place with your fear." Victor stood slowly. "There is no Ravensmoor without the pact. Without the blood, there is no balance. You've broken it. Now it will feed without mercy." He stepped closer. "You could have helped us, but now, you'll die. Alone." Suddenly Margaret appeared in the doorway, wild-eyed, hair disheveled. "She's the last thread," she whispered. "We end it with her. The forest will forgive if we give it back what it lost." Emily backed away, heart racing. The Grangers were no longer just liars. They were true believers, willing to kill to appease a force they no longer understood. She fled the inn, running through the streets toward the hospital. She needed Grace. Her mother was the only one who might know how to end this. At the hospital, chaos had arrived. Staff were missing. The halls were empty. The power flickered. As Emily entered Grace's room, she found it covered in symbols, scrawled across the walls in what looked like blood. Grace sat in the corner, eyes wide, humming the same lullaby from the music box. "Mom?" Emily whispered. Grace slowly turned. "He's almost here," she said softly. "The veil's thin now. He walks in dreams and wakes through us." Emily tried to shake her. "Mom, listen, we can stop this. We can burn the rest of it down. Granger House, the crypt, all of it." But Grace shook her head. "No, it's not the places. It's the people, the ones who carry it inside." Emily froze. "You mean me?" Grace's eyes filled with tears. "You were born into it. I tried to keep you away. But blood remembers." That night, Emily returned to Rachel Whitmore's ruined home. She found what she was looking for in the floorboards. A map, drawn in charcoal, showing a network of tunnels beneath Ravensmoor. At the center, a tree, marked only as the heart root. Beneath it, final altar. Using the map, Emily entered the woods again, flashlight in one hand, a crowbar in the other. She found the tree easily, its trunk twisted, bark blackened by age, roots pulsing like veins. Beneath it, half buried under stone and moss, was a hatch. She climbed down. The tunnel smelled of mold and rotting wood. As she walked, whispers followed her. Faces seemed to shift in the stone, watching, waiting. At the end of the tunnel she found the true altar. A pit rimmed with bones and black feathers. Victor was already there. So was Grace. "She came willingly," Victor said. "The forest calls its children home." Emily stared at her mother. "Mom, don't do this." But Grace only smiled. "It's the only way to stop him. One final gift. Me." Victor raised a knife. It must be blood of the pact. Hers. He lunged at Emily. Grace moved faster. She threw herself between them. The knife plunged into her chest. Everything stopped. Victor stumbled backward, horror on his face. "No! No! Not her!" Grace collapsed into Emily's arms, smiling through. "Blood! I broke it," she whispered. "You're free." Then her body dissolved into ash. The walls groaned. The roots screamed. and Victor caught fire. He didn't burn like flesh, he burned like dry wood, as if hollow. He screamed as the crypt collapsed in on itself. Emily barely escaped. She crawled through smoke and soil, the tunnel behind her sealing shut. The heartroot tree cracked down the center, bleeding black sap, and fell into the earth. She stood in silence. The whispers were gone. The forest was quiet. For the first time in decades, Ravensmoor was empty when she returned. No townspeople, no Granger house, no Rachel, no crows, just a village hollowed out by secrets finally laid bare. A week later, Emily packed her bags and left. No police ever came. No records were found of a town called Ravensmoor. No map marked its existence. It had vanished, like smoke. But at night, in her dreams, Emily still hears the stag, standing among the trees, smiling, waiting. 2 months later, Emily Walker sat in a cafe on the outskirts of Westhelm, sipping lukewarm coffee, her eyes lost in the rain falling outside the window. The world had moved on. She had a new apartment, a new job, a new name on her ID, Emily Grayson. But inside, nothing was new. Every night she dreamed of roots twisting through her body, of blood dripping from antlers, of her mother's voice, soft, broken, singing the lullaby from the music box. And always, the stag had never left her dreams. The forest was gone, the town erased, the Granger house swallowed by the earth. Yet Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she had brought something back with her. It started small, mirrors fogging without steam, birds crashing into her windows, strange scratching under the floorboards, black feathers appearing in her mailbox. Then, one night she woke up to mud on her feet. Again. She tried therapy, sleep studies, medication. Nothing worked. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the altar, and something behind it, still watching. Then came the night of the blood moon. Emily was in bed, half asleep, when the dream shifted. She wasn't in the chapel this time. She was home, her apartment. But the lights flickered red, the walls cracked and pulsed. The floor was covered in leaves. At the center of her living room stood a child, small, pale, with Grace's eyes. The child smiled. "He's awake now," she whispered. "You broke the cage, but you didn't close the door." Behind the child, the stag stepped forward. Its antlers scraped the ceiling. Its hooves sank into the wood. Its eyes, still human, watched her with understanding. "You are the last Elwood," it said, "and I am the last god." Emily tried to scream, but the roots burst from her chest. She woke screaming, covered in dirt and blood. On her ceiling, carved in black soot, "One must remain." She finally understood. The ritual hadn't been stopped. It had been redirected. When she destroyed the heartroot, she didn't kill the curse. She freed it. Now it was untethered, hungry, and connected to her bloodline. Determined to end it, Emily returned to the only place left that still existed from the old records. A small stone well just outside Westhelm, marked on Rachel's map. Its purpose had been unclear. Until now, she went there at midnight, wearing the pendant her mother left behind. The forest was silent. Inside the well, she found a hidden door, and beyond it, a final chamber. This one wasn't underground. It was beneath everything. Reality bent inside. Shadows had mass. Air had weight. The walls moved like lungs. In the center stood a throne made of bone, and the stag sat on it. It had become larger, twisted, part tree, part god, part man. Its voice was everywhere and nowhere. "You brought me back," it said. You carry the pact inside you. You are the offering and the altar. Emily walked forward. I'm not afraid of you anymore. It stood. You should be. She opened the pendant. Inside, a shard of black stone, the same kind the altar had been made from. She drove it into her chest. The stag roared. Roots exploded from the chamber walls. The sky above cracked. Screams echoed from beyond time. But Emily stood tall. I break the blood, she said. I give myself, so no one else has to. The throne shattered. The chamber imploded. And everything went dark. 3 weeks later, a hiker found Emily in a field just outside West Helm, alive. But changed. Her eyes no longer held fear. They held silence. She never spoke of Ravensmoor again. But in her dreams, she sometimes smiles, and somewhere, deep in forgotten soil, the roots sleep. For now. It was Christmas morning in the quiet suburban town of Elmswood, where freshly fallen snow lay like a velvet sheet over rooftops, and the distant sound of bells echoed from the chapel. Inside a modest home on Sycamore Lane, the Dawson family gathered. By the fireplace, warmth glowing off the bricks as gifts were exchanged between laughter and cheer. Sarah Dawson poured cocoa into chipped holiday mugs, her red flannel robe dragging slightly behind her as she moved between the kitchen and living room. Michael, her husband, unwrapped a sweater he pretended to like. But the true joy of the morning centered around 8-year-old Lily Dawson, their only child, gentle, curious, and full of light. Among the shiny packages and ribbons, there was one box that hadn't been placed by either parent. Small, square, wrapped in aged paper with faded angels and tied in burgundy ribbon, it sat quietly at the back of the tree. Lily spotted it first. "Mommy, who's this from?" she asked, holding up the package. Sarah furrowed her brow. "I don't know, sweetie. I didn't see that one earlier." Michael shrugged. "Maybe a neighbor dropped it off?" Lily opened it with trembling excitement. Inside lay an old teddy bear, brown, worn, with one glassy eye and stitched lips that looked like they'd been sewn shut in a hurry. A tag dangled from its neck, brittle and yellowed by time. "To the one who listens, Mr. Buttons." Lily hugged it instantly. Sarah shivered slightly. "That thing looks ancient." But Lily had already made up her mind. "He's mine now." That night, while snow fell in sheets, Sarah walked past Lily's room and paused. Her daughter was sitting up in bed, eyes wide open, whispering. "To the bear." "Who are you talking to, sweetie?" she asked. Lily turned slowly, smiling. "Mr. Buttons doesn't like the cold. He says he remembers it." "Remembers what?" But Lily just giggled and pulled the blanket over the bear. Over the following days, the house seemed to grow colder, darker. Small things at first, lights flickering, toys out of place. Lily's drawings shifting from rainbows and houses to strange things. A tall shadow, a burning crib, a girl with no eyes. Sarah confronted her. "Lily, what are these drawings about?" Mr. Buttons asked. "Me to draw them. He says it's what happened before." "Before what?" Lily looked away. "Before he found me." Michael remained skeptical. He was a practical man, uninterested in superstitions, but even he couldn't explain why their dog, Baxter, now refused to enter Lily's room. He would stand in the hallway, hackles raised, whining softly at the closed door. They called a vet. The vet found nothing wrong. Then came the dreams. Sarah began waking up gasping. Each time she saw the same image before opening her eyes. A little girl in a long nightgown, holding Mr. Buttons, standing silently in a hallway drenched in moonlight. Sometimes she'd be crying, sometimes laughing. But she was always looking directly at Sarah. Lily's behavior changed. She stopped eating at the dinner table. She stopped calling her parents Mom and Dad. Instead, she began using the names Isabel and Tommy. One night, Sarah tucked her in and gently kissed her forehead. "I love you, sweetheart." Lily stared up at her blankly. "I'm not your sweetheart. Isabel's not a baby anymore." Sarah pulled away slowly. "What did you say?" "I said I'm not a baby anymore," Lily said again, voice low, eyes dull. "And you're not my real mother." The lights flickered, and, in the corner of the room, Mr. Buttons sat upright, though neither of them had moved him. Later that week, Michael came home to find Sarah trembling in the kitchen. "There was something in the mirror," she whispered. "What?" "In Lily's room. I saw a girl. Not Lily. She was behind me. Just for a second." Michael tried to comfort her. "You're exhausted. It's the weather. We've been stuck inside too long." But that night, Michael saw it too. While brushing his teeth, the mirror fogged up, and just before he turned away, he saw Lily behind him, except it wasn't Lily. The face was bruised, the mouth sewn shut, and in her arms, the bear smiled. Sarah began researching antique toys. She scoured forums and found one that mentioned a bear with sewn lips. One called the Cradle Bear, supposedly belonging to a girl who died in the 1930s. The post was taken down minutes after she clicked it. On January 7th, they found Baxter dead. He was lying in front of Lily's door, his body curled unnaturally, as if twisted in fear. His eyes were wide open and his paws were covering his ears. Sarah screamed. Lily came to the hallway, completely calm. "Mr. Buttons didn't want him barking anymore," she said simply, and walked away. That night, Sarah found a note tucked into Mr. Buttons' chest cavity. It was old and torn, scrawled in childlike handwriting. "I told them not to lock me in the cradle. Now I'm never alone." The room dropped 10 degrees. The walls moaned. And when Sarah turned to look at her daughter's bed, Lily was gone, but Mr. Buttons sat right in the center, staring straight at her with both eyes, now fully intact. Sarah and Michael stayed awake until morning, searching the house in panic. At dawn, they found Lily curled up in the attic, fast, asleep, surrounded by drawings pinned to the walls, hundreds of them. Every drawing showed the same thing. A girl hanging above a crib, arms outstretched, eyes hollow, and the bear watching from the floor. Lily's hands were stained in red ink, or what they hoped was ink. That same evening, the power went out. Sarah lit candles and went to find Lily. As she opened the bedroom door, she saw her daughter standing on the windowsill, staring down at the snow-covered ground. "I need to go. Back," Lily whispered. "Back where?" "To the cradle." Sarah ran and pulled her down, hugging her tightly, but Lily didn't cry. She whispered into Sarah's ear, in a voice not her own. "Tell them, I'm still waiting." It had been 5 days since Lily stood on the windowsill, whispering about the cradle. Since then, the Dawson household had changed completely. Lily no longer laughed. She no longer played with her dolls or watched cartoons. She spent every waking hour sitting with Mr. Buttons, cradling the bear like it were something fragile and sacred. She spoke to it in a low whisper, often in the middle of the night, her voice barely audible from behind her bedroom door. Michael, ever the rationalist, still blamed it on stress, on the holidays, on the dog's death traumatizing their child. But Sarah knew better. Lily's eyes had changed. Where there was once innocence, now there was something ancient, something watching. Sarah started documenting everything. The symbols that appeared on Lily's walls, drawn in charcoal. The whispers caught faintly on their baby monitor. The way the bear never seemed to stay in the same place twice. Even worse, Sarah had begun hearing things herself. Low hums in the hallway, footsteps in the attic, and at 3:07 a.m. every night, their bedroom door would creak open, just slightly. She confided in a friend, who gave her the name of a retired spiritual reader, Mrs. Lillian Whitlock, who once worked with the police on missing children cases. Desperate, Sarah called and arranged a visit. The day Mrs. Whitlock arrived, the wind outside was sharp and bitter. She entered quietly, a woman in her 70s with piercing gray eyes and a cane shaped like a raven's beak. Lily sat at the top of the stairs when she entered, clutching Mr. Buttons. "Hello, dear," Mrs. Whitlock greeted. "That's a very old friend you're holding." Lily smiled, but it wasn't her smile. "His name's not Mr. Buttons," she said flatly. "His name is Isabel's Cradle." Whitlock froze for just a moment, then nodded. "I see." Mrs. Whitlock spent an hour alone in Lily's room. When she emerged, her skin was pale and her hands trembled. "She's being watched," she told Sarah in a whisper. "There's a presence in the bear, and something deeper in your home. A link." Michael scoffed. "You mean a ghost?" Mrs. Whitlock ignored him. "She's speaking in patterns, phrases from decades ago. Things no modern child should know. Isabel is not just a spirit. She's a remnant of pain. A child who was abandoned, bound to the object she loved most." Sarah asked, "Why Lily?" Mrs. Whitlock's eyes turned toward the stairs. "Because Lily listens. And Isabel was alone for a very, very long time. That night, the whispers started to come through the walls, voices in the vents, laughter from beneath the floorboards. Sarah awoke to find writing on the bathroom mirror. She never let me finish my lullaby. Then the smell began. Sweet, rotting, sugar, like spoiled candy and dried blood. In school, Lily became violent. She scratched another child during story time, claiming the girl looked like the nurse. When asked what nurse, Lily whispered, "The one who took my teeth. She was sent home." Her teacher, terrified, asked Sarah to consider counseling. Sarah said nothing. That evening, Sarah returned to Lily's room to check on her. Mr. Buttons sat upright on the bed. Lily was drawing again. Another picture of the girl with no eyes. But this time, the girl was smiling, holding hands with Lily. Sarah asked gently, "Lily, who is this girl?" Lily didn't look up. "She lives in the bear," she murmured. "She wants to live in me now." The next day, Sarah returned to Mrs. Whitlock with an old photo she found in a sealed envelope in the attic. A photo of a little girl holding the same bear, dated 1935. Mrs. Whitlock studied it. "This girl," she said, "is Violet Harper. Her parents owned the house before you." "She died here?" "Not exactly," Whitlock answered. "She was taken." Then she opened a dusty journal and read aloud. Harper Child was last seen speaking to herself, claiming her toy whispered secrets. On the night of her disappearance, her drawings were found nailed to the walls. All of them showed a crib burning. Her room smelled of lavender and decay. No body was ever found. Sarah's hands trembled. She realized the same smell had filled Lily's room for days. Mrs. Whitlock explained Isabel's story, a girl institutionalized after suffering from night terrors and hallucinations. Her favorite bear was confiscated and locked away. The nurses stitched its mouth shut during discipline. One night, Isabel vanished from her crib, and all they found was the bear, smiling on her pillow. Since then, families who've inherited the bear report strange phenomena: disappearances, madness, murders. Isabel was never buried properly, Whitlock said. Her soul never crossed. The bear is her cradle, her cocoon. That night, Sarah confronted Michael. "We have to burn it." Michael refused. "You want to throw our daughter's favorite toy into a fire based on ghost stories?" "She's not our daughter anymore," Sarah shouted, and then the lights exploded. Glass shattered, and from Lily's room they heard a voice, not hers, laughing. They burst into Lily's room and found her levitating above her bed. Mr. Buttons clutched in her arms. Her eyes rolled. Back in her head, Michael ran to pull her down, but the bear's stitched mouth split open, and it screamed. Michael flew across the room, hit the wall, and collapsed. Sarah screamed, grabbing Lily's body, pulling the bear away, but its fabric had fused with her daughter's arms. She had to rip it free. Lily let out a sound, part child, part demon, that rattled the windows. Mrs. Whitlock arrived moments later. "The spirit is feeding now," she said. "It's stronger. If we don't break the link soon, Lily will be gone forever. How do we stop it?" Whitlock reached into her satchel and pulled out a worn page. "To break the cradle's hold, you must bury its bones beside hers. Only then can the child rest. But we don't know where Isabel is buried." Whitlock nodded slowly. "Then we find the ones who took her." The winter deepened in Elmswood. Snow piled against fences like white coffins. The sun rarely showed. Its face and silence hung over Sycamore Lane like a death shroud. Inside the Dawson home, Lily had become a shell. Pale, unresponsive, her eyes often fixed on something no one else could see. Sarah stayed at her bedside constantly. Michael barely spoke anymore, and the bear, now locked in a sealed wooden box in the basement, scratched at the inside every night. Mrs. Whitlock returned the following morning. She brought with her Violet Harper's sealed case file, recovered from a retired caretaker at the now-abandoned Rose Hill Asylum. The documents were yellowed and brittle, stained in the corners by water damage and something darker. Sarah sat across from her at the kitchen table while Lily lay asleep upstairs. "Violet was the first host," Whitlock said, flipping through the files. "The bear came to her in 1934. Her parents were desperate to quiet her screaming fits and brought her the antique toy from a collector. They had no idea it had already been cursed." Sarah leaned forward. "Cursed by who?" Whitlock paused. "By Isabel herself. She died in that asylum years earlier, mute, beaten, and buried under a false name. Her only possession, that bear. The record stated that Isabel's body was never claimed. The asylum cremated the nameless child and mixed her ashes with the soil beneath the playground on the property grounds. That's where Violet began to dream of her. Isabel needs a cradle," Whitlock explained. "That bear is more than just haunted. It's an anchor, a cocoon, and the child who carries it becomes the next vessel." Sarah's eyes widened. "Lily is next." "She already is," Whitlock answered. "But there's still time." They needed two things to break the bond: Isabel's ashes, buried beneath what remained of the old asylum playground. Violet Harper's original sketchbook, believed to contain protective symbols passed down from her grandmother, a Romani healer. Michael was reluctant, but joined them. They left Lily in bed. Surrounded by protective sigils, Mrs. Whitlock drew in salt, ash, and lavender. The room seemed calm, but downstairs, in the sealed box in the basement, the bear had started to bleed. The building had been condemned for nearly 30 years. Its windows were shattered, walls scorched by fire, and ivy crept through the foundations like veins. They entered the back gate and found the cracked remains of the old playground, half buried in snow. Whitlock guided them toward a rusted swing. "Set, she's here," she said, pointing. They began to dig. The snow gave way to dirt, then to soot, then something solid, a small metal urn etched with a child's name scratched out. Instead, one word remained. Isabel. Suddenly, a whisper echoed from the trees, a child's voice. You found me. Then wind screamed from nowhere, knocking over the urn. Michael caught it. The trees groaned. The ground shook, and from the asylum windows, every light flickered to life, even though there was no power. They ran. That night, back at the Dawson house, they placed the urn beside Lily's bed. She opened her eyes, for the first time in days, but what she said chilled Sarah's blood. Violet never finished the drawing. Whitlock suggested their next stop, the Harper family farmhouse, a place long abandoned on the far side of Elmswood. They found it under a blanket of snow, boarded up but still standing. Inside, time had stood still. China sets on the table, dust-caked furniture, and pictures of Violet's smiling face lining the walls. In the attic, Sarah discovered a cedar chest. Inside it, dozens of drawings, children holding hands with shadows, eyes crossed out. One page stood out, the final drawing. Violet never finished, a symbol, half complete, a warding glyph used to seal the cradle. Below it, Violet had written in trembling pencil, "She promised not to hurt me. She lied." The page was wet, fresh, as if Violet had just drawn it. Whitlock took the page and gasped. "This is what we need." But just then, Sarah saw a shadow move across the window, a figure, a little girl, grinning. Back at the house, Lily had vanished. They found her in the basement, standing in front of the wooden box, her hands covered in blood. The box was torn open. Mr. Buttons was gone, and carved into the wall above the ripped box were the words, "She's in the cradle now." They searched the house, calling Lily's name, panic rising with every second. Then, Sarah stopped. She heard humming, a lullaby, coming from the attic. She climbed slowly, flashlight trembling in her hand. In the center of the attic floor sat Lily, rocking. Back and forth, Mr. Buttons in her arms, but she wasn't alone. Behind her, a second figure. A little girl in a burnt hospital gown, no eyes, no lips, just stitches. "Isabel!" Sarah screamed. The girl turned and in a voice made of dust and grief whispered, "You let her in. Now she stays." The bear's mouth began to move. The cradle rocks. The child sleeps. The vessel opens. Sarah rushed forward, but Lily screamed, throwing herself at the wall. The bear fell and didn't move. For a moment, everything went silent. Then Lily fainted. Back downstairs, Sarah placed the urn in front of the bear and read the final prayer written in Violet's sketchbook. Ash. Salt. Lavender. A circle was drawn. Whitlock began to chant. The house trembled. Lily began to convulse, and Isabel appeared again, screaming, her form flickering between ghost and shadow. "You left me there. I'm still alone." Michael grabbed the bear, Sarah held the urn, and they forced them together inside the circle. A scream like a dying choir shook the foundation. The bear burst into flame. The urn cracked, and Isabel's shadow collapsed, falling into the floor, like a curtain torn from the wall. Lily awoke, tears in her eyes. She whispered, "Is she gone?" Sarah held her tight, but Mrs. Whitlock stared at the burned circle, frowning. "No," she said softly. "Not yet." The Dawson house hadn't been quiet since Isabel's urn cracked open. The ritual seemed successful. The bear was burned. The ashes scattered. Lily had opened her eyes and called Sarah Mom again for the first time in weeks. But something was wrong. The silence was too deep, too perfect, as if the house was holding its breath. Mrs. Whitlock stayed behind for 3 days. She marked every window and door with new wards, salt lines, iron nails, ash symbols on every frame. She even planted rosemary at the corners of the home, but even she knew the truth. "This house isn't haunted anymore," she whispered. "It's been claimed." The next sign came at 3:07 a.m. again. Sarah and Michael both awoke at the same second, gasping. The hallway light turned on by itself, then off. The basement door opened slowly, creaking. No footsteps, no wind. Just the feeling of being watched. Sarah went downstairs alone. She found a new drawing pinned to the refrigerator, a child's crayon picture, a crib, a shadow hanging over it, and in the corner, a stitched face smiling. They had burned the bear, but it was still here. Lily began to change again, worse this time, not gradually, immediately. Her skin went pale. Her lips bled in her sleep. She spoke in whispers under her breath that matched nothing human, and her eyes, they flickered when she blinked. Once blue, they turned gray under certain lights. One afternoon, Sarah found Lily tearing apart her dolls. When asked why, Lily replied calmly, "They lied to her. They all did. The nurses, the doctor, Mommy and Daddy. Now they don't talk." Then she snapped the doll's head off with her teeth. Michael suggested leaving, packing everything, moving far away. But Mrs. Whitlock stopped him. "You think this house holds her? No, Michael. It's your daughter now. Wherever she goes, it goes." That evening, mirrors began to break. The fireplace lit by itself, and from the vents a scream echoed. A child's voice, shrill, broken, and filled with rage. Sarah ran to Lily's room. Her daughter sat in the center of a salt circle drawn with chalk on the walls. Isabel's name, written over and over again in blood-red crayon, and in her hands, a lump of charred fabric. The last piece of Mr. Button's, still warm. That night, Sarah dreamed of the asylum. She walked through twisted corridors lined with screaming children. In every crib, a bear sat stitched shut. Each child had hollow eyes, and at the end of the hallway stood Isabel, mouth unstitched, eyes missing, hands outstretched. "You took my cradle," she whispered. "Now, I take yours." Sarah woke up choking. Whitlock realized the first ritual had been incomplete. Burning the bear and exposing the ashes had weakened Isabel, but hadn't severed her hold. There was one way left. A counter-possession ritual. Using the original binding nursery rhyme Isabel hummed in her crib. They found it in Violet's unfinished diary. "Cradle sleep and cradle fall. One to rise and none to crawl. Ashes burned, soul unbound. May her name not make a sound." It had to be read at 3:07 a.m., exactly where Isabel first fully emerged, the attic. That night, as the hour neared, Sarah and Whitlock prepared. Candles, sigils. Lily, unconscious, in the attic circle, salt surrounding her. Michael stood watch, but just as the first line was read, the circle broke. A gust of air exploded through the attic. The candles went out, and Lily opened her eyes. They were not hers. She levitated into the air, arms spread wide, blood poured from her nose. Her limbs twisted unnaturally. Her mouth opened, wide, and Isabel's voice came out. "This is my body now." Whitlock continued reading, struggling to speak through the pressure of something ancient pushing down on the room. Sarah screamed, her daughter's name. Michael wept. Lily's feet struck the ground, and the house shook. The furniture flew backward. Glass shattered. Paintings burned on the wall, and from the attic door, dozens of little handprints began forming. as if children were pressing from the other side. "Hold the line!" Whitlock shouted. Sarah clutched Lily's hand and whispered the rhyme again. Lily screamed. The attic floor cracked. A hand reached up from the shadows. Isabel's hand, pulling herself into the room. But Whitlock stepped into the circle, chanting louder and louder, until Isabel stopped, paused, and smiled. "Take me then," Whitlock whispered. Isabel reached, touched her forehead, and with a sudden gust, both Whitlock and Isabel vanished, sucked into the floor in a thunderclap of wind and ash. The attic fell silent. Lily collapsed. Breathing. Alive. The attic floor was scorched. In the center, a blackened mark, shaped like a cradle. Mrs. Whitlock was gone, but the haunting had ended. For now. Lily slept for 3 days. When she woke, she remembered nothing. She said the name Mr. Buttons once, then burst into tears. Sarah and Michael never spoke of the bear again. In a quiet room miles away, a girl wakes up screaming in a foster home. She points to the corner, where an eyeless girl in a hospital gown stands holding something burned and stuffed. She hums a lullaby, cradle sleep, and cradle fall, one to rise and none to crawl. 3 weeks passed since the attic ritual. Winter was beginning to break, but inside the Dawson home, the chill never lifted. The scent of burnt ash and iron still lingered in the upstairs hallway. Sarah washed the attic floor 5 times, but the cradle-shaped scorch mark wouldn't fade. It didn't matter. They knew what had happened up there, and what was still to come. Lily returned to school, but she was distant, quiet. Her laughter had vanished. Her drawings returned, but the colors were darker, and every page featured a crib, a shadow, or stitched mouths. The therapist called Sarah after Lily whispered something during a session. The old lady tried to trick her, but the cradle never breaks, only passes. Sarah sat in the kitchen, watching the window as a storm rolled in. The wind whispered through the walls. She hadn't heard from Mrs. Whitlock since that night in the attic. No calls, no trace, nothing. In the news, it was as if she'd never existed, except on Lily's bookshelf, a dusty black leather notebook appeared one morning. Whitlock's journal. Sarah hadn't put it there. She opened it and found a new page, freshly written, though the woman was gone, in that familiar jagged handwriting. The cradle can't be destroyed, only contained. The final ritual must not burn it, only bury it in silence. One last anchor must be chosen, willingly. Then, in smaller writing, if you choose wrong, Isabel won't just return, she'll spread. Michael didn't want to hear it. He refused to believe the entity still lived. "Lily's better," he said. The nightmares stopped. "No," Sarah whispered. "They've only gone quiet." She showed him Lily's newest drawing. A family dinner. 3 chairs, but 4 shadows. That night, the power died. No storm, no wind, just darkness. Sarah lit candles and checked the windows. One was open. Cold air rushed through the living room. In the center of the rug, a small stuffed arm, charred, ripped. Mr. Buttons, Michael, stepped back, horrified. "How?" Lily came down the stairs, barefoot, half asleep. She stared at the bear and whispered, "She's lonely again." They took Lily and left the house, drove to the next town, booked a motel under a false name. But the next morning, the bear was on the bed between them, dry, staring, smiling, and Lily was missing. They searched the motel screaming her name. Found her sitting in the ice machine room, rocking back and forth, had drawn on the walls with blood from her nose. The cradle never moved. It just watched. Sarah collapsed. Michael began to weep. They returned home. In Whitlock's journal, Sarah found instructions. The final ritual would require 3 things: the original ashes from Isabel's urn, which had partially survived the attic collapse, a vessel to hold her again, either the bear or something created in its likeness, a sacrifice, someone willing to carry the weight of the curse forever, not death, not possession, a living soul anchored in ritual, who would act as the new silent cradle, a warden. Sarah had no doubt it had to be her. She stitched the bear back together with twine and hair from Lily's brush, stuffed it with salt, rosemary, and ash, wrapped it in cloth, and placed it in a circle of sigils drawn with her own blood. At 3:07 a.m., she carried it to the attic, now completely sealed in iron. Michael begged her not to do it, but she closed the door, locked it behind her, and sat in the center of the old scorch mark. The ritual began. She read the lullaby in full. Cradle sleep and cradle fall. One to rise, and none to crawl. Ashes laid and salt unbound, by mother's blood the host is found. The candles flickered, wind howled through the floorboards. Then a knock from inside the walls, and then a voice, small, innocent, but shaking with fury. "You left me." The bear twitched, then it stood, on its own. Sarah trembled, tears running down her cheeks. "I'm here now," she whispered. "You're not alone." "Liar," the voice said. The attic walls began to bleed. The lights burst, the windows cracked, and Isabel appeared. No longer a flickering shadow, she was full, solid, eyes burned white, hands blackened by fire. "They all lied to me. You will too." "I won't," Sarah said, voice breaking. "I'll stay." The wind stopped. Everything went still. Then Isabel stepped forward and entered Sarah's body. Her mouth opened, and a scream of wind and ash poured into her lungs. She collapsed. The bear fell still. The attic went silent. Morning came. Sarah lay unconscious, eyes open, but not speaking. The bear was gone, and in her hands, a paper, written in Whitlock's handwriting. "The cradle has been silenced." But her eyes will never close. A week later, Michael takes Lily far away, to the coast. They change their names. Lily smiles again, draws in color again, sleeps without whispering. But Sarah? She's not dead. She sits in a psychiatric ward, still, breathing, eyes wide open. Every night, at 3:07 a.m., she hums softly. And in the room beside hers, the nurses say they hear a child crying inside the walls. Spring had arrived in the coastal town of Grey Hollow. Michael Dawson stood at the edge of a small garden, watching his daughter Lily chase butterflies under the sunlight. Her laughter filled the air, gentle and full of life. It had been nearly a year since they left Sycamore Lane. A year since Sarah sacrificed herself. Since Isabel was bound again. Since the bear disappeared. They never returned to Elmswood. Michael sold the house remotely. Burned everything that came from it. Drawings, clothing, toys. He even changed their last names. The world around them had moved on. But he hadn't. At night, Michael still saw Sarah in his dreams. And every now and then, when the wind blew through Lily's bedroom window, he swore he could hear a lullaby, barely audible. One morning, Michael found an envelope tucked between the newspaper and the door frame. No stamp, no address, just a single word handwritten in calligraphy. Silent Cradle. Inside was a single page. She watches now through stitched eyes. The child sleeps, but the world does not. When silence breaks, the cradle rocks again. At the bottom, a symbol. A small black circle surrounded by clawed branches. The same sigil Sarah used in the attic ritual. Michael burned the letter. But it didn't stop the dreams. He started seeing things in reflections. In the garden window, a girl in a hospital gown, standing behind him. In the rearview mirror, a small burned bear resting in the back seat. Lily didn't see any of it. But she started drawing again. This time, her drawings showed Sarah. One night, Lily came to his room, holding a blank piece of paper. "I need to show Mommy this," she said. Michael blinked. "There's nothing on the paper, honey," Lily smiled. "She'll see it." Sarah Dawson hadn't spoken in 362 days. She was still under heavy watch, unresponsive, awake, silent. The staff at East Ridge Psychiatric Center called her the Watcher. She never blinked, never moved. But at exactly 3:07 a.m. every night she'd, And on the anniversary of her commitment, something changed. She stood, on her own, walked to the far wall of her room, and scratched a message with her nails. She never left. Back in Grey Hollow, Lily woke up screaming. She had a dream of the cradle burning, but not being destroyed, just opening. "There's another girl now," she told Michael. "She lives in the floorboards." Michael tried to calm her, but then he saw it, a small patch of burned carpet forming in the corner of her room, where no heat source existed. The next day, they found a stuffed rabbit on the porch, old, dirty, its mouth sewn shut. Michael drove 300 miles to East Ridge. He demanded to see Sarah. When he entered her room, she turned to him for the first time in a year and said just one word: "Run, Mrs." Whitlock's journal, left behind in Michael's luggage, had one final page he never read. He opened it that night. It read, "When the vessel accepts her place, Isabel sleeps. But when the vessel is forgotten, she wakes. The curse is not destroyed, only recycled. In every child who listens, the cradle returns." That night, Lily vanished from her bed. Michael tore the house apart, found her in the crawl space, laughing, drawing, with red chalk, and holding a brand new bear, its eyes glassy, its mouth stitched. He screamed, but Lily just smiled. Mommy sent him back. She said, "It's my turn now." Then she hummed. And somewhere far away, in the halls of East Ridge, Sarah collapsed to the floor, her eyes finally closing and never opening again.